Hey everyone! Welcome back to Horcrux Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Fleur Hermione and Daphne kissed Harry at the Yule Ball and ancient Veela law bound all three? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Spark. The Great Hall had never looked like this before, and Harry suspected it never would again. Someone, probably Dumbledore, probably with a wave of his wand and a mild expression suggesting it had cost him no effort whatsoever, had transformed the stone floor into something resembling a ballroom from a fairy tale. Ice sculptures caught the candlelight and threw it back in fractured blues and silvers. The enchanted ceiling, usually content to mirror the sky, tonight showed a spread of winter stars so crisp and clear they looked painted. Long tables had vanished, replaced by smaller rounds draped in white and gold. An orchestra of ghosts played at the far end, not the Hogwarts ghosts, who mostly looked bored at the best of times, but something hired specifically for the occasion, translucent figures in formal dress who played waltzes with surprising feeling. Harry noticed none of it, not really. He was too busy trying not to step on Parvati Patil's feet. Left, she said through her smile, because she was too polished to say it through her teeth, though he suspected she wanted to. I am going left. Your other left, Harry, he corrected. She smiled a fraction more genuinely. They completed one full rotation before Harry managed to relax his shoulders below his ears, which he considered a personal triumph. Across the floor, Ron was doing considerably worse with Padma Patil. His version of dancing appeared to involve standing mostly still and hoping the music would eventually stop, and Padma had long since given up trying to correct him and was instead talking to a Beauxbatons girl nearby with the focused energy of someone actively pretending to be somewhere else. The Triwizard champions were expected to open the ball, and Harry had survived that. He'd walked in with Parvati on his arm while the whole school watched, managed not to trip, found his seat at the top table with Dumbledore and the other champions, and had gotten through dinner without saying anything catastrophically awkward. The evening had, by his standards, been proceeding at a genuinely acceptable level. Then the dancing started in earnest, and he'd moved off the floor after the second song, deposited Parvati near some of her friends with what he hoped was a graceful enough apology, and found himself drifting toward the edge of the room where the heat of the crowd thinned out, and the air tasted less like perfume and more like cold stone. He grabbed a drink from a passing tray, pumpkin juice, not that he'd checked, and watched the room. Cedric Diggory danced well, which felt deeply unfair. Cho Chang smiled up at him with something that made Harry's chest do an uncomfortable thing he chose not to examine. Victor Krum had arrived with Hermione, which had caused a small sensation at the top table and a considerably larger one in Harry's head, not jealousy, exactly, but something adjacent, something he hadn't had the vocabulary for when it happened and still didn't. And they were currently sitting at one of the round tables talking with an intensity that suggested neither of them had noticed the dancing had resumed. Hermione looked different tonight. Harry had registered this the way you register something that rearranges a room you thought you knew perfectly. She'd done something with her hair, worn robes that were actually robes rather than oversized school uniform approximations, and there was a quality of ease about her that he rarely saw in classes, as if she'd temporarily stopped bracing for the next emergency. He was glad for her. He was mostly glad for her. A flash of silver caught his eye from the opposite side of the hall. Fleur Delacour moved through the crowd the way light moved through water, not parting people so much as making them want to part, making the space around her feel like it had always been meant for her. She'd been dancing with Roger Davies for the past hour, and Davies had the expression of a man who had won something he was terrified of dropping. She was saying something to him now, tilting her head toward the door that led to the entrance corridor, and Davies nodded with the eager compliance of someone who had stopped using independent judgment approximately 40 minutes ago. Harry watched her cross the floor. She was, objectively, the most visually arresting person in the room, and he'd been aware of this the way you're aware of a fire in your peripheral vision, constantly, with some effort to appear not to be. What he'd also noticed, over the months since Beauxbatons had arrived, was the way she moved in non-public moments. The impatience when someone stumbled over their words because of her. The sharp intelligence in her eyes when she was reading, or thinking, or disagreeing with something, which was more often than people assumed, because most people stopped paying attention to anything above her collarbones. She'd snapped at a group of fourth-year boys last week in the library with a precision that had made Harry want to applaud, though he just kept his head down because drawing attention to himself near Fleur Delacour in the library felt like a social hazard of the first order. She passed through the hall door. Davies followed, nearly bumping into a statue. Harry turned back to the room. "You look like you're doing maths," said a voice to his right. He turned. Daphne Greengrass stood about 3 feet away, a glass of something the color of pale gold in her hand, leaning against the wall with a posture that managed to be both relaxed and composed at the same time. He'd seen her in classes. She was in his year, Slytherin, the kind of girl who sat in the middle rows and produced consistently excellent work without appearing to try and without drawing attention to it, which was a specific skill Harry had a lot of respect for. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of face that was usually described as striking rather than pretty and was actually both. She was wearing deep green robes that probably cost more than his school supplies for 3 years combined, and she was watching him with an expression of mild, dispassionate interest, like he was a puzzle she had already partially solved. "Sorry?" he said. "You're watching the room like you're calculating something." She nodded toward the crowd. "Most people just watch. You look like you're assigning probabilities." Harry considered this. "I think I was just looking at something." "You were watching Fleur Delacour." He didn't bother denying it. "Among other things." She took a sip of her drink. "She's hard not to watch. It's the Veela thing. Even a quarter-blood carries it. People mistake the compulsion for genuine attraction and then feel confused about it later." A pause. "Though in your case I suspect there's genuine component as well." Harry looked at her. "You're very direct." "Slytherin," she said, as if that explained it, and perhaps it did. "And this is a party. Direct is more efficient than spending an hour getting to the same point through social performance." She looked out at the room. "I don't love parties. Why are you here?" "My date is somewhere being impressed by Victor Crumb. I've been abandoned to the wall." She said it with complete equanimity, no bitterness in it. "I don't mind. The wall is quieter." Harry almost smiled. "It is." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, which was unusual enough that Harry took note of it. He wasn't naturally a comfortable silence person, tended toward filling gaps, but Daphne seemed entirely content not to speak, which made him content not to speak, and the music moved through another waltz and the candles threw their light around and the ice sculptures slowly breathed out tiny curling plumes of cold. "Your date looks like she's found better company," Daphne said eventually, nodding toward where Parvati was now deep in conversation with a group of Beau's Baton students, her earlier frustration entirely replaced by animated enthusiasm. "Good," Harry said and meant it. "I was a terrible dance partner." "You weren't terrible. You were mechanical. There's a difference. Terrible is what Weasley is doing over there, which, honestly, I'm concerned for his partner's well-being." Harry looked. Ron had now fully stopped moving and appeared to be in the middle of an argument with Padma about something, his arms doing the specific kind of gesticulation that meant he was talking about something that annoyed him, which was, tonight, probably everything. Harry made a mental note to check on him later, and then immediately forgot it because the hall doors opened and Fleur came back in, and this time she wasn't with Davies. She was looking for something. Harry could tell because the quality of her movement had changed, less the graceful drift of someone crossing a room, more the precise navigation of someone with a destination in mind. Her silver blue eyes swept the hall, touched on Harry, moved on, came back. She started toward him. Or toward the wall, he corrected. Toward the quieter section. Probably getting away from Davies, who was visible through the hall doors looking slightly dazed and considerably less triumphant than he had been an hour ago. She reached the wall. Stood about 2 feet from Harry on his left side, Daphne to his right. None of them said anything for a moment. Then Fleur said, without looking at either of them, "He would not stop talking about himself." Daphne made a small sound that was almost a laugh. Harry said, "Davies?" "Yes, Davies." She said it with a slight French sharpening of the consonants, making it sound like a diagnosis. "For 1 hour he tells me about Quidditch, which, I do not care about Quidditch. I tell him this twice, it does not matter, more Quidditch, and then he begins talking about his marks and charms, which, non, I cannot." She glanced sideways at Harry. "You had a nicer date than me." I stepped on her feet. "At least you were quiet about it." Something loosened in Harry's chest, the knot he'd been carrying all evening, the performance of being a champion, being watched, being evaluated. Standing here at the edge of everything felt more real than anything that had happened all night. He felt, briefly and surprisingly, like himself. "The ice sculptures are starting to melt," Daphne observed. "The one on the left is meant to be a phoenix, I think, but it's beginning to look more like a distressed rooster." Fleur looked, and something shifted in her expression, the composed, beautiful mask she wore like a second skin cracking slightly, a genuine smile pushing through. "Hogwarts cannot help itself. Everything must be dramatic. Our ghosts are playing the music," Harry said. "A bit dramatic, yes. In France," Fleur said, "we do not hire dead people for entertainment. It is a boundary. Reasonable boundary." The orchestra chose that moment to shift into something slower, something that dropped the tempo down to a heartbeat, and the couples on the floor adjusted accordingly, moving closer, the distance between them collapsing to something more honest. Harry watched without meaning to, watched Cho's head tilt towards Cedric's shoulder, watched the candlelight do things to people's faces that made everyone look like a better version of themselves, and felt the quiet particular loneliness of someone standing at the edge of a beautiful thing they have no obvious part in. He didn't realize he'd made any kind of expression until Fleur said quietly, "You are thinking about the girl." "What?" She nodded toward Cho and Cedric. "The one with Diggory. You were watching." "I wasn't." He stopped. "It doesn't matter." "It matters." Her voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "You are 14 and someone you like is dancing with someone else. It is allowed to matter. You sound like you're talking to a child." "You are not a child," she said, and turned to look at him directly for the first time, and Harry found himself on the receiving end of a stare that was entirely stripped of the practiced, public quality that Fleur usually wore, not the beautiful Veela girl performing poise, but something sharper and more real. "You are in this tournament because something put your name in that cup and you chose to face it rather than run. I watched you face the dragon. The other champions had better approaches, technically. Crumb was precise, Cedric was clever, but you were the only one who looked like the dragon itself might want to step back." A slight pause. "That is not a child." Harry didn't know what to say to that. He looked away, and then looked back, and found Daphne watching both of them with an expression that he couldn't quite decipher, thoughtful, careful, something moving behind those dark eyes. "The Veela inner wants to feed you a compliment, and see what you do with it," Daphne said conversationally, addressing Harry but glancing at Fleur. Fleur turned. "I beg your pardon? I don't mean it reductively," Daphne said. "I mean that you said something genuine to him, and you're watching to see if he'll puff up or stay level. It's a Veela assessment thing. It's in Zabini's copy of Creatures, Blood Magic and Heritage, page 243. She met Fleur's gaze without flinching. "You do it with everyone. You did it to me twice in potions last week when we were sharing a bench." The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. The kind where someone has said something accurate that the other person was not expecting to be said. Then Fleur said, "You are reading about Veela and Blaise Zabini's books." "I read everything. The house doesn't limit the subject matter." Something passed between them, a flicker of reassessment, two people recalibrating their models of each other. Harry watched it happen and thought, not for the first time, that Daphne Greengrass was considerably more interesting than her reputation in his house suggested. The orchestra shifted again. The slow song deepened. "Dance with me," Fleur said. It took Harry a full beat to realize she was saying it to him. "I'm bad at dancing," he said, I already told you, I know. I will lead. She held out her hand. Not asking, exactly. Offering. Harry looked at her hand. Then at her face. Then he took it, because refusing felt like refusing something that mattered in a way he couldn't name yet. She did lead. It wasn't even embarrassing, she was simply better than him in the way a river is better than a stone at moving, and she made the correction feel like collaboration. They moved into the edge of the dance floor, not the center, keeping to the shadows near the ice sculptures, and the music wrapped around them, and Harry found that dancing was actually not the ordeal he'd always experienced it as when the other person knew what they were doing. Better, she said. I'm mostly just following you. That is dancing, she said. Everyone thinks it is two people doing separate things at the same time. It is not. It is two people deciding to move together. He thought about that. Is that a Veela philosophy or a dancing philosophy? Both. A slight smile. Is there a difference? They completed half a rotation, and Harry became aware, with a peculiar, unnerving clarity, that Daphne had stepped away from the wall and was crossing the floor toward them, not with any urgency, just walking, glass still in hand, and that from the other direction, Hermione had left Crumb's table and was also moving, not toward them, but on a trajectory that would intersect with where they were standing in approximately 20 seconds, and she was frowning at something in a way that meant she'd thought of a problem and was going to talk through it whether or not anyone had expressed readiness to hear it. Hermione arrived first. Harry, I need to tell you something. Sorry, Fleur, I'll only be a second. Crumb was just saying something about the second task that doesn't match what Professor Moody told you, and I think someone isn't being entirely. She broke off because Daphne had reached them, and Daphne's arrival altered the geometry of the group in a way that Hermione clearly hadn't expected, and for a half-second all four of them were standing in a loose cluster at the edge of the dance floor, closer than any of them had probably intended, the music low and warm and the candlelight doing its work on all of them. You were about to say something, Daphne said to Hermione, not unfriendly. I was about to say something to Harry. Then say it to Harry. She nodded at him. He's right there. Hermione blinked. Right. Harry, I think someone lied to you about the second task, and I don't know if it was Moody specifically or if. But what happened next happened in the way all the important things in Harry's life seemed to happen, abruptly, without preamble, without giving him time to brace. One of the ice sculptures, the Phoenix, now genuinely unrecognizable, cracked. Not dramatically. Not with a sound that would draw attention. Just a sharp internal fracture that sent a shower of ice splinters outward in a wide arc, and the group of fifth years dancing nearest to it yelped and lurched backward, and their movement rippled outward through the couples around them like a stone dropped in water, and the ripple reached Harry's group and Daphne stumbled, caught by the sudden press of bodies. Her drink tilted, she grabbed Harry's arm to steady herself. And her momentum brought her face forward and her lips touched the corner of his mouth, not a real kiss, barely a contact, something between an accident and an apology. And Fleur, still close from the dance, turned at the commotion and the movement brought her in as well, her hand still in his, her face tilting toward his ear to ask if he was all right, and the press of bodies pushing from behind pushing her forward, she kissed him. Actually kissed him. On the mouth. Half a second of warmth and silver and something that smelled like a very high mountain in summer. And then Hermione, who had been leaning in to continue her sentence about the second task directly in his ear over the noise of the crowd commotion, who had been closer than she'd realized, whose face had been 6 inches from his, Hermione, caught in the same ripple, tipped forward and kissed him too. It lasted approximately 3 seconds in total. Then the crowd sorted itself. The space opened up again, and all four of them stood in a loose circle staring at each other. The orchestra played on. Nobody nearby had noticed. The fifth years were brushing ice off their robes and complaining. Roger Davies was standing near the entrance looking for Fleur. Crumb was watching from his table with the focused, evaluating stare of a Quidditch player assessing a threat he hasn't identified yet. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then something happened to the air. Harry felt it first as heat, a warmth spreading from the center of his chest outward, not unpleasant, not painful, but unmistakably magical in the way that only a very few things had ever felt magical to him, the way the first time he touched a broomstick had felt, the way casting expecto patronum for the first time had felt, like something recognizing something. He pressed his free hand against his sternum instinctively. Fleur made a sharp sound. Not pain, more like surprise, like you'd make if someone said your name very loudly in a quiet room. Hermione's hand went to the back of her neck. Something just, Harry, something, I feel it too, Daphne said, and she was the calmest of all of them, her voice level, but her eyes had gone wide and dark and the hand she'd used to grab Harry's arm was still there, her fingers spread flat against his forearm, and she was staring at the point of contact with an expression that was rapidly moving from composed to not composed at all. The warmth in Harry's chest became something else, a pulse, like a second heartbeat, deeper and slower than his own, and then 3 more pulses joined it, slightly out of sync, and then, gradually, over perhaps 10 seconds, they synchronized. 1 beat. Steady. Deep. Shared. What is that? Hermione breathed. I don't know, Harry said, which was true in every practical sense, but some part of him, the part that had always been inexplicably good at magic when the alternative was dying, the part that had conjured a Patronus at 13, the part that had faced a dragon 3 weeks ago with less fear than he probably should have had, some part of him thought, with a surety that bypassed logic entirely, this is mine. This is ours. This is real. On the inside of his left wrist, visible even through his dress robes, something was appearing. A mark, not a brand, nothing violent about it, more like ink rising through skin from below, finding a natural path, 3 interlocking shapes, something between a knot and a constellation, precise and geometric and impossibly elegant for something appearing spontaneously on a 14-year-old boy's wrist at a school dance. Fleur pulled back the cuff of her robes. The same mark. Same wrist. Hermione was already looking at hers, and her face had gone through 3 different expressions in quick succession: shock, the specific focused blankness of a brain downloading information too quickly, and then something that looked, briefly, like awe. Harry, she said, and her voice was very careful. Harry, I've read about this. I've read something about this, somewhere, I can't remember where, but I've read, Hermione. Fleur's voice was very quiet. All the lightness that had been in it during their conversation at the wall was gone. She was staring at her wrist with an expression Harry couldn't read, or rather, could read too clearly, and it was something close to fear, not the ordinary kind, not the fear of something dangerous, but the fear of something irrevocable. I know what this is. What is it? Harry asked. Fleur looked up at him. I need to sit down, she said. All of us need to sit down somewhere that is not air. There was a side corridor off the hall that led to a disused classroom, and Harry knew it because he'd hidden there twice during his first year when the corridor felt too crowded, and once this year when Rita Skeeter had been circling him with her quick quotes quill and the malicious focus of a cat watching a mouse. They found it in less than 2 minutes, Daphne moving through the hall with a calm purposefulness that opened a path without drawing attention, Harry in the middle, Hermione talking under her breath about something she half remembered, Fleur bringing up the rear with a silence that had weight to it. The classroom was cold and dark and smelled like chalk and old parchment. Moonlight fell through the high windows and painted squares of silver on the stone floor. They stood in a loose group near the windows, 4 people who barely knew each other, all staring at identical marks on their left wrists. Tell us, Harry said to Fleur. She was quiet for a moment. Then she let out a slow breath and said, My grandmother. On my mother's side. She is full Veela. She told me stories, when I was small, because Veela women, we have our own laws. Laws older than any ministry. Older than your Hogwarts. Ancient laws, she called them, laws that were never written by anyone human, that exist because they exist. She held up her wrist. This is a triad bond. Silence. A what? Hermione said. 3. The word means 3. Fleur turned her wrist slightly, the mark catching the moonlight. A Veela can form a bond. It is not common, it appends maybe once in a generation, maybe less, with a single person. The bond is sealed with a kiss. It is recognized by magic itself, not by any witch or wizard or ministry. It cannot be undone. It cannot be refused after it is sealed. It is. She stopped. Started again. It is a permanent connection. Between two people. But there are 4 of us. Daphne said. Yes. Fleur's voice was careful in the way of someone carrying something fragile. A triad bond is. It has no records that I know of. My grandmother spoke of it once, as legend. Not real, she told me. Impossible. A Veela forming a bond with one person is rare. A Veela forming a bond that incorporates 3, that is. She shook her head. She said the last record of it was more than 400 years ago. The old text called it La Triade in sorcery. The enchanted triad. She said the magic of it was so strong it changed the people involved permanently. That it amplified everything they were. Changed them how? Harry asked. Fleur met his eyes. In every way that matters. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I have right now. She looked briefly very young. I was not prepared for this. My grandmother's stories. I thought they were stories. She looked at Hermione. You said you remembered something. What? Hermione was already thinking out loud, pacing 2 steps in each direction, her hands working through the air in the way they did when she was assembling pieces. It was a book. Not a textbook, a history, something in the restricted section. I was looking for something else entirely. 2nd year, I think, or maybe early 3rd, there was a chapter on Veela blood magic, and it mentioned a bonding ritual that predated all modern magical law, something that operated under what they called lex antiqua, ancient law, which supersedes ministry regulation entirely because… She stopped pacing. Looked at the mark on her wrist. Because it's not a human law. It's a magical one. The kind that exists in the fabric of magic itself, not in any institution. And that means what, specifically? Daphne said. She hadn't moved from where she stood, hadn't paced, hadn't touched the mark on her wrist again, but her stillness was the kind that contained motion rather than the kind that replaced it. What does lex antiqua actually do? In practical terms? In practical terms, Hermione said slowly, it means that nobody, not the ministry, not Dumbledore, not Beauxbatons, not anyone, can dissolve it, argue around it, or legislate it out of existence. It's as fundamental as gravity. A pause. In practical terms, it means that whatever this is, it's permanent. Another silence. Longer this time. How does everybody feel? Harry asked, because it seemed like the most direct, relevant question, and he'd always been better at direct and relevant than at everything else. Strange. Hermione admitted. Good strange. Like. She seemed to struggle with the description, which was unusual for her. Like being warm somewhere I didn't know I was cold. Yes, Daphne said quietly, as if she didn't want to admit it but was unwilling to lie. I feel it too, Fleur said. She dropped the careful distance in her voice. The pulse. It is like a second heartbeat, yes? And it is all 4 of us? All 4 of us. Harry confirmed. Though I notice you've all described it as a good thing and you're all still looking at it like it's a catastrophe. It is both, Fleur said plainly. You understand what this means for me. I am a champion. I am here for a competition. I did not come to Hogwarts to be bonded to anyone, let alone, and my grandmother will. She pressed her lips together. And the Veela Council. What about them? Harry said. They have opinions. About Veela bonds. About Veela bonds specifically. My grandmother was not approved of, in certain circles, for bonding with a human. And I am already. A slight tension around her eyes. I am already considered diminished by some of them. Less than fully Veela. If they learn that I have formed a triad bond with a half-blood human wizard and 2 human witches, they will not celebrate it. Let them not celebrate it, Harry said. I'm not asking for their celebration. Fleur looked at him. I mean it, he said. I didn't choose this either. But it's happened and it's apparently permanent, and if there's a council somewhere with opinions about that, their opinions are exactly as important as they've always been, which is not at all, because none of us had any say in the matter and nobody asked them. Something shifted in Fleur's expression. The wariness didn't vanish, but it made room for something else. Recognition, maybe, or the early shape of trust. He's right, Daphne said. Politically, strategically, and philosophically. We deal with what is, not with what anyone else wishes were the case. She finally looked down at her own mark again. Though I'll point out that I also didn't plan for this, and I have family complications of my own that this will complicate further. Her jaw tightened briefly. Which is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight I am more interested in understanding what we actually are now. We're bonded, Harry said. All four of us. We know that. What I mean is, what does it do? Practically. She looked at Fleur. Your grandmother said it amplifies people. Amplifies how? Their magic, Fleur said. Their natural strengths. Who they are, essentially. She said the ancient texts described triads as near unstoppable forces because the bond creates a shared magical reservoir. What one person lacks another can contribute. What one person carries alone they now carry with three others at their shoulder. She paused. She said every triad in history was recorded as extraordinary. That they changed things. Not always in ways the powers around them appreciated. Harry thought about that. He pressed 2 fingers against a mark on his wrist. It didn't hurt, it just felt warm, slightly raised, like a brand that had been made gently. He thought about the pulse in his chest, the steady 4 count of it, and that deeper surety that he'd felt when it first happened, the recognition of something real. Will it change tonight? Hermione asked. Will it grow? Get stronger? I think it already is, Daphne said. I think it's been growing since it activated. Can't you feel it? They were all quiet, checking inward. Harry could feel it. It was subtle, but it was there, a warmth in his magic that hadn't been there an hour ago, something easier about the connection to it, as if a door that had always required a hard push was now standing slightly open. He'd always been able to do magic, sometimes spectacular magic, defensive magic, instinctive magic, but it had always come with an edge of effort, of fighting through his own doubt. Right now, in this cold chalk-smelling classroom with moonlight on the floor and the distant sound of orchestra ghosts playing a waltz, it felt effortless in a way he had no precedent for. We should go back, Hermione said. If we're missing for too long, people will notice, and the last thing we need tonight is attention. Agreed, Daphne said. We need to talk, Fleur said. Tomorrow. Properly. Not tonight when everyone is, when there is wine and dancing and everything is already strange. Tomorrow, when we can think. Tomorrow, Harry agreed. But, he looked at all 3 of them, at Fleur's careful composed worry, at Hermione's already working mind, at Daphne's deliberate stillness. I want to say something first. He didn't know exactly how to phrase it, so he went with direct, which had always been his default. Whatever this is, whatever it means for all of you, whatever complications it creates, I'm not going to make it worse. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen or try to hide it or make any of you feel like it was a mistake. It happened. The magic recognized something and it responded. I don't think magic like this makes mistakes. None of them said anything immediately. Then Fleur said, quietly and with a precision that meant she was choosing every word. No. Ancient magic does not make mistakes. She met his eyes. That does not mean it is simple. I know, Harry said. But simple was never really my experience anyway. Something happened to Hermione's face, a smile that broke through before she could stop it, surprised and genuine. Daphne made the small sound again that was almost a laugh but wasn't quite. Even Fleur's careful expression softened at the corners. They went back to the ball separately. 2 minutes apart, entering through different doors, returning to different parts of the room. Harry found his way back to the drinks table and stood there with his pumpkin juice and watched the room. Cedric and Cho, Ron and Padma, Dumbledore at the high table with his half-moon spectacles and his benevolent expression, all of it exactly as it had been an hour ago, and felt the steady 4-beat pulse in his chest and thought that the world looked different now in a way that had nothing to do with anything he could see. He saw Fleur cross the room to a Beauxbatons table, composure reinstalled and perfect. He saw Hermione return to Victor Crumb with a smile that was slightly too focused to be natural. He saw Daphne walk to the drinks table, pour herself a new glass, and stand beside a group of Slytherins with her dark eyes moving over the room until they found his for one brief, clear, deliberate moment. She raised her glass a fraction. He raised his. The orchestra played on. The ice sculptures continued their slow melt. Dumbledore said something amusing to Professor McGonagall, who tried not to smile and mostly failed. Roger Davies was still looking for Fleur. The enchanted ceiling threw winter stars down on all of them, and none of them knew, yet, what had changed. Harry knew. The pulse in his chest knew. The mark on his wrist, warm under the fabric of his dress robes, knew. Something had started tonight that was not going to stop. He found he wasn't afraid of that at all. Chapter 2. The Weight of Ancient Things. Harry woke up at 5 in the morning knowing something was different before he opened his eyes. The pulse was still there. That was the first thing, the steady 4-beat rhythm in his chest, deeper than his own heartbeat, running underneath it like a second river beneath a river. He lay on his back in the dark dormitory and listened to Ron snoring 2 beds over and counted the pulse and thought about how he'd fallen asleep to it, and hadn't found it disturbing at all, which probably said something. He got up, dressed quietly, and went to the window. The castle grounds were blue-gray in the early light, the lake a flat pewter disk, the forbidden forest a dark mass at the edge of everything. His breath fogged against the glass. On his left wrist the mark was visible even in the low light, 3 interlocking shapes, precise and clean, like something carved by someone who knew exactly what they were making. He pressed his thumb against it. Warm. Still warm. The door to the dormitory opened a crack and then wider, which was unusual given that everyone else was asleep, and Harry turned to find that nobody had come through it, which was more unusual, and then less unusual when the air beside the door shimmered and Hermione pulled his invisibility cloak off and stood there in her school robes, shoes in one hand, hair still slightly undone from the night before, with the expression of someone who had not slept and had spent the hours doing something more useful instead. "I borrowed it months ago for the library," she said before he could ask. "I kept meaning to give it back. It's fine. What did you find?" She crossed the room, sat on the end of his bed without being invited, and dropped a stack of parchment in her lap. Not books, she'd clearly copied things, handwritten notes in her precise script, some of them heavily annotated in the margins with her own bracketed commentary. She'd been at this for hours. There were ink smudges on her fingers. "I found it," she said, and the way she said it, not triumphant, more like standing at the edge of something very tall and looking down, told him that what she'd found was significant. "Tell me." She spread the parchment on the bed between them. "The book is called Lex Antiqua, a survey of pre-ministry magical law, and it's in the restricted section, which I got around by using a specific loophole in the permission structure that I discovered in second year and have never told you about because you'd have used it constantly. Reasonable. There's an entire chapter on Veela bonding law. The basic bond, what Fleur described, between a Veela and one other person, that's documented well, it shows up in a dozen sources, even some ministry texts acknowledge it exists even though they'd prefer it didn't. But the triad bond is different. It's covered in 4 pages and the tone of those 4 pages is..." She searched for the word. "Reverent." Which is unusual for a legal text. Reverent how? Hermione looked at her notes. The triad bond is described as la prima magia, the first magic. The argument is that the earliest recorded magic, before wands, before schools, before any of the institutional structures, was relational. That magic didn't exist in individuals, it existed between them. The triad is described as a return to that. A reversion to the original form. She glanced up at him. The book calls it the most complete magical bond in existence. Not the strongest in the sense of raw power, though apparently it does that too, but the most complete in that it creates a closed system. For people sharing a single magical core. Harry sat with that. A shared core. Not that our individual cores disappear. More that they're connected. Like rivers joining. The text says a triad's combined magic is not additive, it's exponential. Each person's magic is amplified by the resonance of the other three. She tapped a section of her notes. There's a reason the historical triads all change things. It wasn't incidental. What else does it do? What are there rules? There are implications, not rules. The bond doesn't instruct you. It doesn't force behavior. But it does. She hesitated. It intensifies things. Loyalty. Instinct. The book uses the phrase magical fidelity, meaning that people bonded in a triad will find it very difficult to work against each other. Not impossible. But it creates a kind of internal resistance, like trying to do something your whole body is arguing against. That seems like it could cause problems. If any of us had wanted to harm any of the others, yes. I don't think that's an issue currently. She looked at her wrist. There's also this. She turned one of the parchment sheets around to show him a copied diagram, a sketch of the mark, with annotations. 3 interlocking shapes. Each one labeled. The 3 shapes each represent one of the bonded. The overlapping sections are the shared space. But there's a 4th element, do you see it? The center, where all 3 overlap. Harry looked. That's where they all meet. That's you, Hermione said quietly. Or that's the anchor. The text says every triad bond has an anchor, the person the magic selected as central. Not leader, it's not a hierarchy thing, before you start worrying about that. The anchor is the person through whom the bond routes itself. The one the magic considered the most. The word they use is foundational. In practice it means your magic is the node. Harry stared at the diagram. And the magic decided that was me. It decided that was you. She watched him process this. I think, she said carefully, that there might be a reason for that. Given everything. Given what you are. What you are, Hermione said. Being someone whose magical signature is apparently so fundamentally distinct that the Sorting Hat argued with itself for nearly 4 minutes before placing you. Yes, I researched that in first year. It's in the school records. I know you didn't know. And who cast the corporeal Patronus at 13 and who faced a dragon 3 weeks ago and walked out the other side when the smart money was on him not doing so. She met his eyes. The bond chose its anchor. I think it chose well. Harry didn't answer. He looked out the window at the lake. Did the book say anything about what happens to triads? Historically? Hermione's expression changed. Just slightly. What? He said. The historical record is incomplete, she said in a tone that meant there is a specific reason for that. Several triads simply aren't documented past a certain point. The text suggests, and I found this corroborated in 2 other sources I checked after, that triads were frequently considered politically destabilizing. Because a bonded group of 4 people with exponential shared magic who operate under laws that no ministry can touch are, from an institutional perspective, a significant control problem. They were disappeared, Harry said flatly. Or scattered. Or their history was buried. I found a reference to a triad in 15th century France that was disbanded by the precursor organization to the current Veela Council, not violently, but through legal pressure, intimidation, social isolation. The bond itself couldn't be broken. But you can pressure people into acting against their own interests. She paused. The Veela Council will know about this. Once Fleur's mark is visible, they'll know. Fleur said as much last night. What she may not have said is that the Council has authority, political authority, within Veela community law, to place conditions on Veela who form bonds with humans. They can restrict access to Veela resources, to the blood magic that Veela half-bloods can inherit. They've done it before. She looked at her notes. It's functionally a punishment structure dressed up as law. Harry thought about Fleur's face in the classroom last night. The fear that had been, very briefly, entirely unguarded. That's what she was worried about. Yes. Hermione stacked her parchment. And there's Dumbledore. What about him? She was quiet for a moment. Harry, the bond is visible. The mark, everyone who knows about Veela law will recognize it. Dumbledore knows about Veela law. He's been alive for 112 years and he's made it his specific business to know about every significant category of magic. When he sees the mark, he'll know exactly what happened and exactly what it means. A pause. He won't be pleased. Why not? It's not like I went looking for it. Because you're bonded to 3 of the most magically capable young women at this tournament, one of whom is connected to an ancient magical tradition that operates outside his jurisdiction, and the bond itself can't be controlled, managed, or undone. She said it plainly, no edge to her voice, just fact. You know what Dumbledore does when he encounters things he can't control. Harry did know. He'd had 4 years to develop a detailed understanding of how Dumbledore managed things he found inconvenient, gentle misdirection, carefully selected information, the particular kind of orchestrated ignorance that was presented as protection. He'd been on the receiving end of it enough times that he'd stopped finding it comforting. He'll try to manage it, Harry said. He'll try to manage it. Hermione agreed. Which means we need to understand it completely before we have that conversation with him. The dormitory around them was still asleep. Ron's snoring had entered a new and creative phase. Outside the window, the sky had lightened from gray to the pale blue of early morning. Fleur and Daphne need to know all of this, Harry said. That was my next point, yes. They met by the lake at 7. Hermione had sent notes, precisely worded, careful about detail, delivered by the school all system and therefore not through any route that went through a teacher's office. Harry arrived first, then Fleur, still in her Beauxbatons uniform, her silver blonde hair braided back with a precision that suggested it had been done with great care and probably reflected a great deal of internal turbulence. Daphne arrived last, hands in her pockets, expression neutral. The 4 of them stood at the edge of the lake and the cold came off the water in slow rolling waves and somewhere beneath the surface something moved. The giant squid, probably. Or something else. The lake had always been a place of contained otherness, and this morning it suited Harry's mood exactly. Hermione went through everything. Methodically, clearly, without drama, because that was how she handled things that were dramatic. She diffused them by explaining them until they became manageable. She handed out copies of her notes. Fleur read them with the focused intensity of someone cross-referencing against something internal. Daphne read them once, quickly, and then set them down and looked at the lake. The council will send someone, Fleur said, when Hermione finished. I think within the week. The bond it does not broadcast itself, but there are people who can sense these things. My grandmother will feel it from France, I am certain of this. And if my grandmother feels it, she will tell the wrong people before she tells me. She pressed her lips together. She loves me, but she is political. She will think she is helping. What will they want? Daphne asked. To claim authority over it. Over me. Fleur's voice was even. They will say that as a Veela bond it falls under their jurisdiction. That they have the right to evaluate the bond, evaluate Harry. She said it without the H in the French way, and Harry had noticed she only dropped it when she was thinking in French, which meant she was under more stress than she was showing. And determine whether it is. She made a brief, controlled gesture that conveyed extensive frustration. Whether it is acceptable. It's not their determination to make, Harry said. I know that. So when they come, we tell them that. Fleur looked at him with the expression she'd had the night before in the classroom, not quite trusting but moving in that direction, measuring the distance carefully. You say that as if it is simple. It is simple. The execution might be complicated, but the principle is simple. He met her eyes. You told me last night that ancient magic doesn't make mistakes. If that's true, then the Council's opinion about whether this was an appropriate mistake is irrelevant, because it wasn't a mistake. Something moved in Fleur's expression. Not the mask slipping, more like something behind the mask choosing to lean forward. The principle is simple, Daphne said. She'd turned from the lake and was watching Harry with those dark, careful eyes. But Fleur's right that the execution is complicated, and I want to make sure we're all thinking about it clearly. She looked at Hermione. You said the bond creates exponential amplification. What does that mean in practical terms right now, this week? I think it means we're already stronger than we were 2 days ago, Hermione said. And it will increase as the bond deepens. The text was clear that the bond matures over time, the connection strengthens with proximity, with... She paused, briefly, in a way that suggested the source text used terminology she was choosing to translate carefully. With shared experience. With trust. She looked at her notes. There's a specific passage that says a mature triad is capable of things that have no other magical equivalent. Combined spellcasting. Shared magical sense, being able to feel what the others feel, magically, in a crisis. And the anchor. She looked at Harry. The anchor, in a mature bond, can draw from the other's reserves. Not take from them. Draw, with consent. The text is emphatic about the consent. So theoretically, Daphne said, Harry could access a magical reserve roughly 4 times his own. More than 4 times. The exponential nature, more than 4 times. Daphne said, as if confirming something she'd already calculated. During the second task. Which is in February. The implication settled over the group. That's not why we're doing this, Harry said. I know that. I'm noting the coincidence. Daphne's voice was dry. I'm also noting that someone put your name in the Goblet of Fire, and that someone has been not quite correctly briefing you about the tasks, according to what Hermione was saying at the ball last night before we were interrupted by physics. I'm noting that you're 14 and in a competition designed for 17-year-olds and that the bond, inconvenient timing aside, gives you access to resources that might prevent you from being killed. She paused. I'm pointing this out because I'm Slytherin and we notice these things. Crumb told me something last night, Hermione said, taking the thread from Daphne. He said the second task involves the lake, which matches what Harry was told. But he said it involves a retrieval. Something taken from each champion that they have to recover. He said Karkaroff told him he'd have an hour. She looked at Harry. Moody told you 45 minutes. 15 minutes less, Daphne said. Which is not an accident, Fleur said. They all looked at each other. The lake moved beside them, dark and cold and full of its own secrets. Right, Harry said. He said it the way he always said things that simplified a complex situation down to its essential point, not dismissively, but with the kind of clarity that comes from deciding not to be afraid of something. So someone in this tournament is trying to disadvantage me specifically. Again. Which is consistent with someone putting my name in the cup specifically. Which means someone wants me in this tournament, and also wants me to struggle in it. Which means they want me here for a reason that isn't winning. He looked at the lake. The dragon was real. The tasks are real. The danger is designed. Yes, Daphne said. And Moody is the most likely vector, since he's the one who's been advising me. Also yes. All right. Harry picked up a flat stone from the bank and turned it over in his fingers. Then we work around Moody. We prepare for the second task properly, with accurate information, and we don't pretend that what I learned from him is reliable. He looked at Hermione. The lake. I've started, she said, and produced a second stack of parchment from somewhere in her robes, this one thicker, with her characteristic flag tabs at important sections. Gillyweed is the cleanest solution. Professor Sprout has it in the greenhouses, second to last section, third shelf. It produces gills and webbing for exactly an hour. Crumb will likely use partial transfiguration, which is brilliant but leaves his hands compromised. Cedric will figure out a bubblehead charm. The lake's primary obstacles are Grindylows in the shallower sections, and the Merpeople colony at the center, Hermione. Daphne said, not unkindly. Yes? Pacing. Hermione stopped. Looked mildly affronted and then less so. Right. Point being, I have it covered. The preparation side. Harry needs to focus on execution and on whatever the retrieval target turns out to be. A pause. The book suggested that for the anchor in a triad, the shared magical sense activates most strongly in high-stress situations. Harry might be able to feel where we are during the task even from underwater. Can you feel us now? Daphne asked Harry. He checked. Not precisely. More like, I know which direction each of you is. Like a compass with 3 needles. Daphne nodded. Same. It's faint, but it's there. She looked at Fleur. You. Fleur had been quiet for several minutes, reading through Hermione's notes with a thoroughness that suggested she was memorizing rather than just reading. She looked up. Yes. You are all present. At the edges. She set the parchment down. Last night my grandmother told my mother about Veela bonds when I was 6. She said, I remember this because I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. She said a bonded Veela always knows where her people are. That she can close her eyes in a forest and point exactly to every one of them. I thought it was metaphor. She looked at her wrist. It is not metaphor. Your grandmother, Harry said. What's she like? Fleur considered the question. She is magnificent, she said, and said it simply, without performance. She is entirely Veela, full blood, and she is 70 years old, and she looks perhaps 40, and she does not apologize for anything she is. She loves me very much, and she will be simultaneously proud that I have formed a triad and furious about the timing and the politics. A slight smile. She will like you. You sound sure of that. She has always liked people who do not flinch. The smile held. You did not flinch when I told you about the council last night. You told me their opinion was irrelevant. She would say exactly the same thing, and then she would say it in 3 additional languages to make sure it landed. Harry almost laughed. That's a generous reading, Daphne said, given that we've all known each other for approximately 9 hours in any meaningful sense. Magic this old doesn't operate on social timelines, Hermione said, and then looked slightly surprised at herself for saying it, and then squared her shoulders and leaned into it. I mean that. The bond recognized something fundamental in all of us. Not what we know about each other, what we are. The knowing each other part comes after. Hermione Granger defending something that doesn't have a logical framework. Daphne said, and it was very nearly teasing, in the specific way of someone who didn't often tease. This really is an unusual morning. I have a logical framework. The framework is just built on premises you can't fully empirically test, which is uncomfortable but not unprecedented in magic. Fair. The sun was properly up now, casting flat winter light across the grounds. In an hour the castle would be awake in earnest, students at breakfast, teachers circulating, the day's machinery beginning. They had until then in this particular pocket of quiet, this temporary space where the 4 of them existed outside the normal structure of Hogwarts. Dumbledore, Harry said. He hadn't forgotten. He'll want to talk. He's going to know the moment he sees you, Hermione said. He'll probably call you in today. Before dinner, I'd guess. What do we want him to know and not know? They all looked at each other. He knows what the bond is, Daphne said. We can't prevent that. The mark is visible and he's not an idiot. What we can control is how much he understands about what it does, specifically, the implications for the tournament. You want to keep the amplification aspect quiet? Fleur said. For now. Yes. Because the moment he understands what Harry has access to, he'll try to, as Hermione said, manage it. Or route it. Use it for whatever plan he already has in motion. Daphne was doing the thing Harry had observed last night, the calm systematic dismantling of a problem into its components. Right now our greatest advantage is that we understand the bond better than he does. That gap will close quickly. We should use it while it exists. That means we need to decide what we tell him. Harry said. Not lie. I'm not going to lie to Dumbledore. It doesn't work, and it feels like something that comes back around. No lies, Daphne agreed. Selective disclosure. He asks a question, we answer the question as asked. We don't volunteer. She looked at Harry. You specifically. He'll ask you, not us. He doesn't account for us fully. That's a mistake he makes because he sees 4 students and not a bonded unit. Harry nodded. And I answer what's asked and nothing more. And you don't apologize for the bond, Fleur said, and there was something careful in her voice. You do not explain it as if it is something that requires justification. It does not. It is ancient magic and it is valid, and if he implies otherwise, you do not accept the implication. I don't apologize for things that aren't mistakes, Harry said. Fleur studied him for a moment. Then she said in a tone that had lost most of its careful distance, Good. Hermione had been making notes on fresh parchment. She looked up. There's one more thing. She hesitated in the specific way that meant the next thing was significant, and she wasn't sure how it would land. The bond is going to change things socially. People will notice something is different before they know what it is. The mark is concealed under sleeves, yes, but the quality of us, together, is going to be visible. Magic like this doesn't stay subtle. She looked at each of them in turn. People will talk. Some of them will talk to the wrong people. Let them talk, Harry said. We've all been talked about before. None of us dissolved. Daphne made that almost laugh sound again. The Slytherin rumor mill is going to have a spectacular month. The Prophet will find out eventually, Hermione said more soberly. Rita Skeeter, Harry said, is a problem for when she becomes a problem. Right now she's background noise. Hermione looked like she wanted to say more on this topic and was physically restraining herself from doing so. I'm just noted, Harry said. We'll deal with it when it arrives. They walked back to the castle together, which was itself a statement of a kind, a Hogwarts champion, a Beauxbatons champion, a Gryffindor, and a Slytherin, all walking in the same direction at the same steady pace, not performing anything for anyone, just moving. The few early rising students who passed them on the grounds clearly didn't know what to do with the image and mostly looked away. The summons came at 11. A small bird made a fire that landed on Harry's shoulder during his morning free period and burned away into a note in Dumbledore's precise, elegant handwriting, requesting Harry's company at his earliest convenience, which both of them knew meant immediately. Dumbledore's office was, as always, a room full of evidence that its occupant knew far more than he was currently discussing. The portraits of former headmasters dozed or watched with undisguised interest. Fawkes was on his perch and regarded Harry with the focused warmth that phoenixes seem to bring to everything. Dumbledore himself was behind his desk, half-moon spectacles in place, a cup of tea steaming at his elbow, and the expression that Harry had learned to read carefully, the one that presented as benevolent calm and contained, behind it, the working machinery of one of the most sophisticated minds in Wizarding Britain. Harry, he said. Sit down. Lemon drop? No, thank you. Quite right, they're more for my benefit than anyone else's. Dumbledore folded his hands. I hope the Yule Ball was enjoyable. It was fine. Good. Fine is often underrated. A pause perfectly timed. I wonder if I might ask you about something. I noticed, and forgive me if this is an intrusion, a mark on your wrist this morning when you passed me in the corridor. On your left wrist. Harry extended his left arm without being asked and pushed back the sleeve. The mark was clear in the morning light. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment. His expression didn't change, which was itself an expression. You know what it is, Harry said. I have some familiarity, yes. He looked up from the mark to Harry's face. I confess I wasn't expecting it. Neither was I. Can you tell me what happened? There was an accident with one of the eye sculptures at the ball. A lot of people were pushed close together. Some people ended up closer to each other than they'd planned. Dumbledore waited, clearly aware that Harry was navigating the edges of what he was saying. A triad bond activated, Harry said. I'm told it's rare. Extraordinarily rare, Dumbledore said. He picked up his teacup, held it without drinking. Harry, I want to be direct with you, because I think you deserve directness. I'd appreciate that. The triad bond is among the most powerful magical connections in existence. It is also, historically, something that has attracted a great deal of political attention and, in some cases, institutional pressure. I want to make sure you understand the implications. I'm working on understanding them, Harry said. I have good resources. Dumbledore looked at him. The working machinery was very visible now, beneath the benevolent surface. I have no doubt. I would simply, Professor. Harry said it quietly, no edge in it, but with a steadiness that he noticed surprised him slightly. He'd always found it difficult to hold ground with Dumbledore, had always felt the pull of the man's authority like a gravitational field. Right now he felt it, and stood still inside it without being moved. I know you want to understand what this means for whatever plans you have. I'm not trying to make your life harder. But the bond is what it is, and I'm not going to treat it like a problem that needs to be solved or a complication that needs to be managed. It happened. It's real. We're dealing with it. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His blue eyes, usually giving nothing away, showed something complicated. The tournament, he said. The tasks ahead are things I'll handle. Harry. Something shifted in Dumbledore's voice. Something that was, Harry thought, genuine. The mask of the benevolent architect slipping slightly to show the person underneath, who was old and tired and carrying things that Harry would probably only understand much later. I need you to be careful. There are forces at work in this tournament that I am not in a position to fully explain to you yet. I know, Harry said. I've been aware of that since September. The bond, a triad bond, makes you more visible, not less. To certain people. To Voldemort, Harry said. Dumbledore didn't flinch. He never flinched at the name. Among others. Then those people will deal with what they find. Harry stood. Was there anything else? The old headmaster looked at him for a long moment across the wide desk, across all the ticking silver instruments and sleeping portraits and accumulated years, and Harry saw in his eyes something he hadn't expected to see. Not manipulation, not calculation, but something that was closer to reassessment. Like a man looking at a piece of something he thought he'd understood fully and finding new dimensions in it. No, Dumbledore said. I think that covers it. Thank you for coming, Harry. Harry was at the door when Dumbledore spoke again. The bond chose well, he said quietly, in the tone of someone making an admission rather than an observation. Whatever else I might think about the timing, I do believe that. Harry stopped. Didn't turn. Hermione said the same thing. Miss Granger is, as usual, correct. He walked out. In the corridor, out of sight of the gargoyle, he leaned against the stone wall for one moment and let himself feel the pulse, 4-beat, steady, warm, and felt, with absolute clarity, that the 3 directions the compass pointed all still held. He pushed off the wall and walked toward lunch. Fleur was sitting at the Beauxbatons table across the hall, and she looked up when he entered, not the careful, measured look she'd worn last night, but something more direct, more immediate, a look that said how did it go without saying anything at all. He gave her the smallest nod. Fine. We're fine. She turned back to her lunch. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione was already watching him over the top of a book with a question in her eyes. He gave her the same nod. She visibly relaxed by 3 millimeters, which for Hermione was practically collapsing with relief. Daphne, at the Slytherin table, didn't look at him at all, which was the most Slytherin possible way to communicate that she was aware of his arrival and had noted its significance. Harry sat down, picked up his fork, and ate his lunch. Ron dropped into the seat beside him a minute later, still slightly off from the night before. The Yule Ball had not been a triumph for Ron, and it showed in the set of his jaw. "How was the morning?" he asked, meaning nothing particular by it. "Interesting," Harry said. "How are you?" "Fine." Ron stabbed a potato. Padma won't look at me. That's fair. I know. I was terrible. He stabbed another potato. I don't know how to, the whole thing was just. He made a vague gesture that covered the entire preceding evening. You seemed all right, actually. Better than me. Low bar. Still. Ron looked at him sideways. You all right? You seem different. Harry considered this. I'm fine, he said. Just thinking about the second task. That's not until February. Better to be early. Ron looked at him with the fond, slightly baffled expression that Harry knew meant Ron had noticed something he couldn't quite name and had decided not to push. Right, he said. Very responsible. Good. That's new. He said it without any real sting, just observation, and went back to his potatoes. Harry ate his lunch. The pulse in his chest was steady and warm. Outside the tall windows the winter sky was a brilliant, cold, unambiguous blue, and the lake caught it and threw it back, and somewhere beneath the surface something was waiting, and Harry thought, without fear and without doubt, that whatever it was, it would meet something it had never planned for. Not a boy alone. 4. Chapter 3 Fire and Ice. The first time they trained together, it nearly ended in disaster. Not because of the magic. The magic was, from the first moment they attempted anything collaborative, staggering in a way that none of them had quite prepared for despite Hermione's extensive research. No, the first session nearly ended in disaster because Daphne and Hermione had fundamentally different ideas about how to approach a problem, and those ideas collided with the quiet, precise violence of two tectonic plates meeting. It was a Wednesday, 3 days after the ball. They'd found a room on the 7th floor that Harry had never noticed before, which was itself unusual, because Harry had spent 4 years learning this castle's hiding places with the dedication of someone whose survival had frequently depended on knowing them. A room that appeared when you needed it, and gave you what you needed, which currently meant a large, clear stone space with high ceilings and the feeling of a room that had seen a great deal of magic and respected people who came to it seriously. Hermione had a lesson plan. She'd written it out on 2 sheets of parchment, timed to the half hour. There were checkboxes. Daphne looked at it, looked at Hermione, and said, No. What do you mean, no? I mean that structured practice sessions with predetermined objectives are exactly the wrong approach for exploring a magical bond we don't fully understand yet. Daphne held the parchment back out. You can't plan for unknown variables. You absolutely can plan for unknown variables. You build flexibility into the structure itself is the problem. We don't know what we're working with yet. We need to feel it first. Then we can plan. We already know theoretically what the bond theory, Daphne said, is not practice. Hermione's expression suggested that this was not a distinction she fully accepted. They're both right, Fleur said, from where she'd been watching this exchange with the focused patience of someone refereeing a match and waiting for the right moment to step in. Hermione's preparation is invaluable. Daphne's instinct is also correct. We do not work from the plan as written. We work from the questions it was built around. Both of them looked at Fleur. What are the questions? Harry said, before either of them could resume. Hermione set her parchment down. Reset. Whether we can feel each other's magic deliberately, rather than just passively. Whether directed spell work from one person affects the others. Whether the amplification is automatic or requires active engagement. She rattled these off cleanly, the teacher she'd always been when the mode suited her. Those are the actual questions. The timetable was just scaffolding. Good, Daphne said. Then let's answer them. That was at 9 in the morning. By noon, 3 things had happened that none of them had anticipated. The first was Hermione setting every sconce in the room alight simultaneously without meaning to. She'd been attempting a directed lumos, not even a challenging spell, something to test whether the bond's amplification was as literal as the text suggested. She'd cast it, and the magic had roared through her wand with approximately 4 times its usual force, hit the target sconce, continued beyond it, and ignited the next 6 in a cascade that lit the entire room in one blinding instant. She'd stood there looking at her wand with the expression of someone whose car has just gone from 0 to highway speed in 1/10 of a second. "Oh?" she said. "Yes," Daphne said. I was aiming for one." "You aimed for one and hit all of them," Harry said. "So the amplification is automatic, not optional. Which is important to know," Hermione said, and then sat down and wrote something on her parchment, because even in moments of astonishment she maintained her notes. The second thing was Harry. He'd been trying to feel the edges of the shared magical reservoir that the text had described, the way the bond made 4 individual reserves feel like one larger, connected pool. It was difficult to explain even to himself, like trying to look at something in your peripheral vision without moving your eyes. But he'd been at it for 40 minutes while the others worked through various spells, just sitting on the floor with his eyes closed, listening inward. And then he'd found it. A warmth at the edges of his own magic, a softness there, a sense of open space beyond the walls of himself. He'd reached toward it, not grabbing, just extending. And the room had done something. The stone floor had shifted. Not moved, more like rippled, the way water ripples when you drop something in it, a single wave moving outward from where Harry sat, spreading to the walls, and every loose object in the room, parchment, quills, Hermione's stacked books, Daphne's spare robe draped over a chair, lifted exactly 6 inches into the air and hung there for 3 seconds before settling gently back. All 4 of them were still. "Harry," Fleur said carefully. "I know. What did you do?" "I'm not entirely sure." He opened his eyes. The floor was normal. Everything was where it had been. "I touched the edges of the shared part. The reservoir. And the magic responded." "To what specifically?" Hermione had her quill in her hand before the floor had settled. "To me reaching out." He thought about it. "It felt like, when you're swimming and you reach out to push off a wall. You're not fighting the water. You're just using what's there." He looked at his hands. "I didn't cast anything. I didn't have my wand out." They all looked at each other. "Right," Daphne said quietly. "So wandless environmental magic at whatever exponential multiplier the bond is currently running at." A pause. "Good to know." The third thing was Fleur and Daphne, and it was the thing Harry found himself thinking about later because of what it revealed rather than what it did. They'd been working on the question of directed magic between bonded partners, whether one person's spell work could be intentionally channeled through another, the way electrical current could be routed through a circuit. Fleur had been attempting to push a portion of her magic outward through the bond in Daphne's direction, something the text described as conduit casting, which was theoretically possible in a mature bond but was generally documented as emerging naturally over years. She'd pushed. Daphne had received it, unexpectedly, visibly, sucking in a short breath as the warmth hit her, and had, with no instruction and no warning, taken that warmth and cast it outward through her own wand as a silent shield charm that Harry had walked into without paying attention. It stopped him cold. Not gently. "Ow," Harry said. "Sorry," Daphne said, not sounding particularly sorry, and then looked at her wand and at Fleur with an expression that was, briefly, entirely unguarded. Something had moved in her face, not the warmth exactly, more the shadow of warmth, the outline of something she didn't yet have the framework to name. Fleur was staring at her too. It worked," Daphne said. Back to composed. But it was 3% less convincing than usual, and Harry suspected Hermione noticed because Hermione noticed everything. They worked for 3 hours and stopped by early afternoon not because they'd exhausted the possibilities but because 4 people newly accessing exponential magical amplification for the first time needed rest the way someone who'd just run their first marathon needed rest, not in pain, but with a deep physical certainty that they'd used something large. Walking out of the room, which they did in pairs to avoid the visual of all 4 of them together drawing comment, Harry fell into step with Fleur, who was quiet in the particular way that meant she was thinking rather than withdrawn. "You're worried about something," he said. "I am often worried about something. Specifically right now." She was quiet for 10 steps. Then, The conduit casting. With Daphne. She kept her eyes forward. It felt familiar. More than the theory suggests it should, at this stage. Familiar how? Like something I have done before. In a different life. She glanced sideways at him, a look that lasted exactly long enough to communicate that she was saying something she didn't fully have words for. Veela magic is ancestral. It does not originate in us individually, it passes through us from everything that came before. When I channeled through Daphne today, it felt like old water in a new pipe. Like the magic knew the shape of the channel. Harry thought about this. You think the bond has history. I think the triad has always existed, in some form, and we are the current form of it. She said it with the certainty that she'd been bringing to everything about the bond, not arrogance, but a bone-deep sureness, the way you're sure of things you've known without knowing you've known them. That is not something I can prove to Hermione. Hermione will find a way to be convinced of things she can't prove when she's ready. Harry said. Give her a week. That got an actual, genuine, unqualified smile from Fleur, warm and quick and nothing like the practiced public version. They ate dinner at their separate tables. Harry was aware of the other three the way he was aware of windows in a room, not always looking, but always knowing where the light came from. He ate his food, talked to Ron about Quidditch because Ron needed to talk about Quidditch, and watched Neville Longbottom across the table struggling with his Transfiguration homework and thought, not for the first time, that Neville was considerably better than people gave him credit for, including Neville himself. After dinner, Daphne found him in the corridor outside the Great Hall. Not the full group, just her, appearing from an alcove the way only Slytherins appeared, which was without any announcement at all. Walk, she said. They walked toward the library, because the library after dinner was full of students, and therefore the best possible place to have a conversation nobody could overhear. My family, Daphne said, when they were far enough from anyone. I said I had complications. I should explain them. You don't have to, I'm choosing to. She looked straight ahead. The Greengrass family is one of the oldest pure-blood families in Britain. We were never Death Eaters. My father made that call in the First War and it cost him socially, within the pure-blood circles, but he held it. He said he was protecting the family. A pause. What he was actually doing was building leverage. He has connections to people on both sides of several significant lines. He uses those connections to keep us safe and to maintain our social position regardless of who wins any given political conflict. He plays both sides. He plays no side, Daphne said. Which is a more dangerous position than it sounds, because nobody fully trusts someone who won't commit. He's managed it by being useful to everyone and belonging to no one. She glanced at Harry. The Triad Bond, once it becomes publicly known, will be seen by him as a political event. He will want to manage the family's position relative to it. Meaning he'll want to manage you. He'll want to advise me. He'll frame it as concern. Something moved in her voice, not bitterness, but the careful handling of something that had sharp edges. He loves me. I don't doubt that. He also cannot see his children without seeing them as resources. He taught me to think strategically. He also taught me that strategy is more important than what you want. Those two lessons are in permanent conflict for me. Harry thought about that. What do you want? She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, I want to stop calculating everything. She said it matter-of-factly, as if reporting a diagnostic result. I'm good at it. It's useful. But there's a version of me that just responds to things without checking the angles first. I met that version briefly, for about 20 seconds last night in a cold classroom, and it was. She stopped. Disconcerting. Disconcerting good or disconcerting bad? Both. A slight pause. Mostly good. Which is itself disconcerting. Harry thought about his own life, the parts of him that he'd spent years pushing down, the instincts and wants and simply himself elements that got swallowed by the enormous machinery of being Harry Potter, who was expected to be humble and reactive and always slightly less than he actually was. He understood the architecture of what she was describing better than she might have expected. The bond doesn't let you hide, he said. No, she agreed. That's becoming clear. They'd reached the library. Through the large doors they could hear the low murmur of students at tables, pages turning, Madame Pants making the pointed silence of someone who could shush you loud enough to be heard across a room. The corridor was quiet. Your father, Harry said. When he finds out, he'll come here. He'll come in person if he can arrange it. He has connections that make arrangements possible. Or he'll find another way to reach me. She met Harry's eyes. I want you to understand that I'm not asking you to solve that for me. I'm telling you because if he does something, reaches out to you, tries to open a channel, uses something that looks like diplomacy, you should know that whatever he offers comes with a price he won't itemize up front. What do I do if that happens? Tell me first. Don't engage without telling me first. A pause. Please. Done, Harry said with no hesitation. She looked at him for a moment in the way she often did, with that evaluating precision, but there was something added to it now, something that was trying to decide whether to relax. You didn't think about it, she said. Didn't need to. Most people would at least, Daphne. He said her name with a directness that wasn't unkind. You're in this with me. That's not conditional. The quality of her stillness changed. Just slightly. Right, she said. Good. She pushed off from the wall. I'm going to the library. I want to find the pre-1600 section on Veela law. Hermione's already read it. I know. I want to read it myself. She pushed through the library door. Over her shoulder. Different people extract different things from the same text. Harry stood in the corridor for a moment. The pulse in his chest was steady. 4 beat. Warm. He went back to Gryffindor Tower. Moody cornered him the following morning. Not literally cornered. Mad-Eye Moody was subtle about the things he chose to be subtle about, and physically trapping a student in a corridor would have been visible. But he'd arranged it so that Harry was coming out of transfiguration when Moody happened to be passing, and his magical eye, the one that could see through things, the one that always made Harry feel like he was being read rather than looked at, fixed on Harry's left wrist with an attention that was precise and deliberate. Potter, he said. Walk with me. I have charms, you have 5 minutes before charms. Walk with me. They walked. Moody's gait was the characteristic uneven rhythm of his false leg, the tap and the step, the tap and the step. He didn't speak immediately, which was its own kind of pressure. Heard a rumor, Moody said finally, his voice the rough gravel it always was, the voice of someone who'd been in enough battles that it had permanently rearranged his vocal cords. Triad bond. Yule Ball. Not a rumor, Harry said. The magical eye swiveled toward him. No? No. Who's in it? Harry looked at him. That's a fairly personal question. I'm asking as your teacher. And for your protection. With respect, Harry said. I don't entirely believe that. Moody stopped walking. His real eye fixed on Harry with a sharpness that was, as always, genuinely unsettling. You're suspicious of me. I'm suspicious of people who give me incomplete information and claim it's for my benefit. He kept his voice even. The second task. You told me 45 minutes. Crumb was told an hour. The silence that followed was a very specific kind, the silence of someone recalibrating. Harry watched Moody's face and didn't look away from the magical eye despite the fact that the magical eye made you want to, in the same way that staring into a bright light made you want to. Who told you that? Moody said. Does it matter? It matters how reliable the source is. The source is reliable. Another silence. Then Moody said, You should have more time in the lake. I'll look into it. He said it gruffly, without apology, the way he said most things. The bond, be careful with it. There are people who'll want to use it. I know, Harry said. That's generally true of everything I have. He walked to Charms. He was 30 seconds late. Flitwick didn't comment, Because Flitwick was one of the teachers at Hogwarts who understood that Harry Potter being 30 seconds late was probably because of something worth being late for. The week moved. They trained every other day in the Room of Requirement. That was what they'd started calling it, not officially, just among themselves, because the room appeared when required and gave them what they needed, and that was name enough. The sessions were structured after a fashion, with Hermione's questions serving as direction and Daphne's insistence on instinct serving as correction when the structure became too rigid, and the balance of the two produced something that worked. Harry's wandless magic was the most dramatic development. He'd always had flashes of it, the accidental magic that had followed him through childhood, the roof incident, the glass at the zoo, but it had always been reactive, driven by extreme emotion. Now it was available in a different way, less like weather and more like a resource, something he could reach for. He practiced in the room while the others worked on conduit casting, sitting on the floor and doing small, precise things, moving objects, lifting and setting them, once extinguishing and relighting all the candles in sequence like a slow wave across the ceiling. He didn't always use the Bond's reservoir. Some of it was just him, and the distinction was becoming clearer as the days passed, the sense of where his own magic ended and the shared pool began. On the fourth training session, he pushed a little harder. He was standing in the center of the room while Fleur and Hermione worked on something at one end and Daphne was reading in the corner. She always brought at least one book, as if the reading was cover for being in the room, which it very much was not, and he closed his eyes and reached into the shared space and pulled. The air in the room changed. He felt all three of them register it simultaneously, 3 distinct flickers of awareness through the bond, none of them alarm, more like attention. The way you look up when a sound in another room changes. He pushed outward from that center and the magic moved like a tide, not destructive, not even particularly dramatic, just a clean expansion of pressure in all directions, like a bell ringing with the whole room as its interior. Hermione's notes lifted off the floor and hovered. Every candle burned twice as bright for 1 full second. The stone under Harry's feet warmed. He let it settle. Opened his eyes. All 3 of them were looking at him. "Right," he said. "I'm figuring it out. That was wandless, full reservoir access, and you held it controlled for..." Hermione looked at her watch. 6 seconds. "Harry, that's extraordinary." It felt longer. Magic always feels longer than it is. She was already writing. "How much control did you have over the direction of it?" "Full control. I could have pushed it in one direction only if I'd wanted. And you chose not to. I wanted to see what even distribution felt like." Daphne had set her book down. "Impressive. Don't get comfortable with it." "Meaning?" "Meaning that comfort with a skill is what makes you sloppy with it. You've done it once cleanly. That's one data point. Do it with intention 20 more times and then be comfortable." She picked her book back up. "You're talented and you're also 14 and those 2 things are going to fight each other. Daphne Greengrass, who has known me for 1 week, telling me about my patterns," Harry said. "The bond gives me access to things that would normally take 6 months to observe," she said without looking up. "I'm using it." Harry looked at Fleur, who was watching this exchange with a slight smile. "Is she always like this?" "I've known her for 4 months," Fleur said. "Yes." Fleur had been working on something she hadn't told the others about until the 5th session, when she demonstrated it without warning. She'd been reading her grandmother's letters. She'd written to her grandmother the morning after the ball and had received a response within 2 days by very fast Bose-Baton's owl, which had arrived with a package of herbs Harry didn't recognize and a letter that Fleur had read 3 times before sharing any of it. The grandmother's name was Apollon, and she had, apparently, responded to the news of the triad bond with a combination of profound spiritual validation and extremely practical instruction. What Fleur demonstrated was fire. Not ordinary fire, Veela fire, which Harry had technically seen before in the form of the bird transformation that Veela reverted to under threat, but which was something different here. Something controlled. Something woven rather than erupted. She stood in the center of the room and extended both hands, palms up, and the fire came from inside her outward, golden white, not orange, not red, a color that was more light than flame, and she didn't transform, didn't lose control of her appearance, didn't become anything other than precisely herself. She held it, shaped it, let it spiral upward in a column that kissed the ceiling and then brought it down and extinguished it cleanly. None of them said anything for a moment. "My grandmother's letters," she said. "She told me, Veela fire, we are taught to contain it. As children, as Veela especially, we are taught that it is dangerous, that it is destructive, that it must be controlled, meaning suppressed. She said this was wrong." Fleur looked at her hands. "She said fire that is suppressed builds pressure. Fire that is understood and expressed, it serves you. She said the triad bond would amplify my Veela nature, and that if I went into it still trying to suppress." She shook her head. "She said I needed to meet it properly first, before it met me without permission." "Your grandmother sounds extraordinary," Hermione said. "She is," Fleur said simply. "She also said—" She stopped, as if deciding whether to share the next part. Then, she said the last triad she found record of in her family's histories. The woman at its center. The witch who was the anchor. She said she was described as— She looked at Harry. As someone who death had touched and not kept. That the magic chose its anchor from those who had passed through something that should have ended them and came back different. The room was very quiet. "Harry," Hermione said softly. "I know what she means," he said. He didn't elaborate. None of them needed him to. The scar on his forehead was not a small or abstract thing, and the story it told, the part of the story that everyone in the magical world knew, was sufficient context. What none of them could know yet was how much of that story was still to be written. "Your grandmother also said," Daphne said, "and I'm guessing here based on what you're not saying, that the Veela Council is going to be a significant problem. And that she can't or won't be able to stop them." Fleur looked at her. "Yes," she said after a pause. She has influence. But she is not council. And what she told me is that the council has recently become—" She searched for the word. "Aggressive. There is a faction within the council that wants to reassert old Veela law. Not in a reformist way. In a—" She shook her head. "In a way that uses power to consolidate power," Daphne said. "Yes. So we're a threat to that project," Hermione said, thinking out loud. "Because the triad is power that operates outside their framework and can't be brought inside it. And because," Daphne added, "if a half-Veela who they consider diminished has access to triad bond power, it undermines their entire hierarchy of Veela worth." She said it coolly, but there was something quiet and angry underneath it. "It's the same mechanism as blood purity politics in Wizarding Britain. Create a hierarchy, enforce it, punish anything that doesn't fit." The room was very still. "How long before they get here?" Harry asked Fleur. "My grandmother said she estimated 2 weeks from the ball. Perhaps a little more. She said they will come with official-sounding purposes and they will want to speak to me alone." She met Harry's eyes. "I will not be speaking to them alone." "No," Harry said. "You won't." The sessions continued. The magic grew. Between sessions the bond settled into something that was present without being intrusive, a warmth, a compass, the 4-beat pulse. Harry noticed that his dreams were different, less of the fragmented, running quality they'd had since first year, less of the sense of being chased through dark corridors. They weren't better exactly. Just different. Solid. Like dreaming from inside a room with walls. He mentioned this to Hermione in passing and she immediately added it to her notes, which he'd expected, and then she looked at him in the particular way she had when she was about to say something personal that she hadn't decided whether to say yet, and he waited. "The bond is protective," she said. "Not in a shield sense. In a structural sense. Like 4 people building a building together versus 1 person trying to hold up the ceiling alone." She looked at her wrist, at the mark. "I keep trying to find something wrong with it. In the books. In the logic. There should be a cost I'm not seeing. And I can't find one." which bothers me more than finding one would. She looked up. The ancient texts treat it with reverence, not caution. Which is unusual, because ancient magical texts treat almost everything with caution. A pause. Harry. I think this might just be good. Harry looked at her, really looked, in the way the months and years of friendship made easy, the way you can look at someone when you know the specific quality of their courage and how much it costs them to say certain things. Hermione, who wanted everything to have a logical structure and a documented risk and a reference source, calling something simply good. Yeah, he said. I think so too. She nodded once, sharply, as if putting a full stop on the sentence, and went back to her notes. Outside the room of requirement on the evening of their sixth session, with January settling its full cold weight on the castle, Harry stood in the corridor and watched Fleur and Daphne walk in opposite directions toward their respective dormitories and felt the pulse in his chest and understood something he hadn't quite understood before. The bond hadn't made him something other than himself. It hadn't replaced what he was or overwritten it. What it had done, what he could feel clearly now, 6 weeks on, with the evidence of training and conversation and magic and the strange, specific intimacy of knowing 3 people's magical cores from the inside, was make more room. Like a house with more rooms than you'd thought it had. The same house. More room. His wand was warm in his pocket. His scar was quiet tonight. Down the corridor, Neville Longbottom was wrestling with a herbology textbook that had grown a pair of stubby legs and was attempting a slow escape toward the staircase. Neville, Harry said, and caught the book by its spine as it waddled past. Thanks, Neville said, slightly out of breath, taking it back. It does that when it gets bored. 3rd time this week. He looked at Harry with the earnest, slightly apprehensive quality that had defined most of his Hogwarts existence. You all right? You look. He stopped, uncertain. What? Different. Good different. Like you figured something out. Harry looked at him. Neville Longbottom, who had spent 4 years being told he was inadequate by teachers and peers and probably himself, and who kept showing up anyway. There was a specific kind of courage in that, not the dramatic, dragon-facing kind, but the grinding, daily kind that didn't have an audience. Working on some things, Harry said. How's the herbology? Terrifying, Neville said honestly. But I'm getting better. Yeah, Harry said. Me too. He walked back to the tower. The castle settled around him, stone and magic and 400 years of accumulated history, and somewhere in its 7th floor a room stood ready for them, and in France an old Veela woman was writing letters in the careful language of someone who knew what was coming. And in some ministry office a man whose face wore borrowed features was adjusting his plans for a boy who was turning out to be considerably more difficult to diminish than he'd anticipated. The second task was 6 weeks away. The Veela Council was 2 weeks away. Harry went to sleep with the 4-beat pulse counting steady in his chest and thought about fire that had been suppressed so long it had built pressure, and thought about what happens when you stop suppressing it. He thought it would probably be loud. He thought that was all right. Chapter 4. Beneath the lake the Veela Council arrived on a Tuesday, which felt wrong. Tuesdays were ordinary. Tuesdays were double potions and lunch and the specific tedium of the middle of a week. Whatever the Veela Council was, it wasn't Tuesday. There were 3 of them. Harry saw them from the entrance steps as they crossed the grounds from the main gate, 3 women moving with the particular quality that marked Veela blood, that gravity-defying grace that wasn't quite human, except where Fleur's version of it was warm silver. These women were something cooler. Older. The magic around them had weight to it, the kind that accumulates over decades rather than erupts in a moment. The eldest was perhaps 60 in appearance, which meant nothing, given what Harry now understood about Veela aging, with white gold hair pulled severely back and eyes the color of winter sky. The other 2 flanked her like punctuation. He sent a pulse through the bond. Not a word, they hadn't developed words yet, just intention, the emotional shorthand of a shared core. What he sent was, they're here. 3 responses came back. Fleur's was a flash of something that was not fear and not readiness, but the specific quality of meeting something you've been expecting and have decided to face directly. Hermione's was focused, alert, mind already moving. Daphne's was clearly precise. A single note, like a key being pressed once on a piano. Harry went back inside and found Fleur in the entrance hall. She was already there. She'd dressed carefully, not her beaux batons uniform, but her own clothes, deep silver-gray robes that were elegant without performing elegance, her hair down and straight, no jewelry. She looked like herself distilled to its essential quality, which Harry had come to understand was Fleur's version of armor. "The tall one," Harry said. "Who is she?" "Councilwoman Seraphine Vauquelin," Fleur said. "She is the head of the progressive faction, they call themselves. What they mean by progressive is that they believe Veela should integrate into human magical society rather than remain separate. What they actually practice is control through assimilation." Her voice was level. "She is the one who told my grandmother that my father was an unfortunate choice. She said this at a council gathering when I was 8, and I was standing in the room." Harry looked at her. "I'm sorry. It made me very determined," Fleur said, which was both an answer and a deflection, and Harry let it be both. "She will be polite. She is always polite. She will frame everything as concern and tradition and my welfare, and the welfare of Veela kind. None of it is any of those things." "What is it?" "It is politics. They want the triad bond registered with the council. Logged, categorized, placed inside their framework where they can monitor it, and condition it, and eventually, manage what we are." She finally looked at him directly. "I am not going to let that happen." "Good," Harry said. "Neither am I." Fleur's chin lifted a fraction. "They will want to speak with me alone first. They won't get that. Harry, they won't get it," he said. Not loudly. Just with the uncomplicated certainty that had been growing in him since December, the quiet authority that didn't announce itself. "You're not walking into that meeting alone. Whatever we say to them, we say together." She studied him for a moment in the way she sometimes did, that Veela assessment thing Daphne had named at the ball, the measuring of how someone carried what they were. Then she gave a single small nod. Hermione and Daphne arrived from their respective directions within 2 minutes of each other, which was either coincidence or the bond's compass working without conscious engagement. Probably the latter. Hermione had her bag, which meant she'd brought books, which meant she'd been preparing specific references since Harry's pulse signal and probably since the previous Thursday when they'd first discussed timeline. Daphne had brought nothing visible, which with Daphne meant she'd prepared everything internally. They met the council in a small receiving room off the entrance hall. Dumbledore had made it available, which told Harry that Dumbledore had known they were coming, which told him several other things that he filed away for later. The room had 4 chairs arranged facing a longer bench, which was clearly the council's setup and clearly designed to create a specific power dynamic, and Harry moved 2 of the chairs to the side without comment and arranged all 4 of theirs in a single line directly facing the bench, close enough that there was no table between them, no barrier, just air. He sat in the center. Fleur to his left. Hermione and Daphne to his right. Seraphine Vauquelin entered with her 2 companions and looked at the arrangement, and something very controlled moved behind her eyes. "Mademoiselle Delacour," she said. In French, which Harry didn't speak and which he suspected was deliberate. "It is good to see you well," Fleur answered in English. "Thank you, Councilwoman. You know why we've asked that we speak together." A slight pause at the "we." "I was hoping to speak with you privately first." "We're the Triad," Harry said. "There's no private for one of us. You're talking to all 4 or you're not talking to any." Vauquelin turned her winter sky eyes to him. She had the quality of someone who was very rarely looked at directly by people significantly younger than herself, and Harry looking at her directly, and not finding it any kind of challenge registered visibly. "Mr. Potter, you understand this is a matter of Veela law. I understand you believe it is," Harry said. "Respectfully, I'd argue the Triad operates under Lex Antiqua, which predates Veela Council authority by several centuries. But I'm happy to hear your position. Something shifted at the council bench. The second woman, younger, perhaps 40 in appearance, sharp-featured, leaned slightly toward Vauquelin. The third, who had not spoken, was watching Harry with an attention that felt different from the others. Not hostile. More like scientific. You have done your research, Vauquelin said. We have, Hermione said, opening her bag. Would it be useful to go through the specific texts we've referenced? We have the relevant sections copied. Vauquelin looked at Hermione with the expression of someone recalibrating the nature of the meeting they'd expected to have. That will not be necessary. She folded her hands on the bench. May I speak plainly? Please, Harry said. The Triad bond is real. We do not dispute its validity or its power. What the Council concerns itself with is the context of its emergence. She looked at Fleur. You are in the middle of an international competition. You are a champion of beaux batons. The bond's existence creates complications. For the tournament, for the perception of Veela in the broader magical community, for the Council's ability to claim authority over something they didn't generate and can't control. Daphne said. A very clean silence. Vauquelin turned to Daphne with the specific attention of someone encountering unexpected resistance from a direction they hadn't covered. You are Miss Greengrass. I am a Slytherin. A pure blood. She said it not contemptuously but analytically. You have no Veela blood. No. The bond chose me anyway. Daphne met her gaze with a steadiness that was entirely unhurried. Which I imagine is one of the things that concerns you most. If a bond this powerful activates through a pure blood with no Veela connection, it suggests the bond's selection criteria are broader than your institutional framework accounts for. The third councilwoman, the one who'd been watching scientifically, made a sound that was nearly suppressed and was definitely the beginning of a laugh. Vauquelin's composure held. We have concerns about the stability of an immature bond during a high-stress competition. We have concerns about Mademoiselle Delacour's well-being. I am well, Fleur said, with a quietness that was sharper than volume. I have not been well in the way I am well now since, I do not know when. So please, councilwoman, let us not use my well-being as the reason for this conversation. She leaned forward slightly. My grandmother sends her regards. She also sends this. She produced a letter from her robes, sealed with wax, the Veela family crest Harry had learned to recognize over the past weeks. It is a formal invocation of Premier Droit. First right. The right of the bonded Veela's family to witness and validate any council proceedings regarding the bond, before the council may take any official position. Vauquelin looked at the letter. Her expression didn't change, but the quality of her stillness did. That right? Hermione said, with the careful precision of someone who had read the relevant text 4 times. Applies under Article 7 of the Veela Ancestral Compact, which supersedes council procedural authority. I have the passage here if you'd like to review it. Vauquelin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Apollon is not present. Apollon is in France, Fleur said. The letter stands regardless. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes. It ended without the council achieving any of what they'd come for. No private conversation with Fleur, no formal registration of the bond, no agreement to any oversight structure. What they got instead was Hermione's extremely thorough legal summary of why their jurisdiction didn't apply and Fleur's grandmother's letter sitting on the bench between them like a quiet closed door. When the council left, Vauquelin paused at the door and turned back. She looked at Harry again with those winter sky eyes, and he thought she was going to say something pointed, something that would need answering. Instead she said, You are very young for this. I know, Harry said. I'm catching up fast. Something moved in her face, not warmth exactly, but the edge of something that might become respect under different circumstances. Then she left. The door closed. Daphne looked at the ceiling. That went better than it could have. They'll be back, Fleur said. Yes. But next time my grandmother will be with them. She said grandmother in French, grandmère, and the word carried a softness that was entirely genuine. She will not be patient with Vauquelin. What about the third one? Harry asked. The one who didn't say much. Councilwoman Renée Beaumont. Fleur said. She is complicated. She is the youngest of the council, she was appointed 3 years ago, and she is the one member who has openly written about the triad bond as a legitimate form rather than a theoretical curiosity. A pause. My grandmother trusts her. She was the one who nearly laughed. Hermione noted. Yes. Fleur almost smiled. She is perhaps an ally we do not know we have yet. Harry filed this away. Then he stood up and stretched and said, Right. Second task is in 11 days. The shift in energy was immediate, all 4 of them clicking from political strategy to practical preparation with the fluency they developed over the past 6 weeks. The bond made the transition smooth, not jarring. 4 instruments in an ensemble moving to a new section. I have the gillyweed, Hermione said. I've checked the dosage 3 times and cross-referenced with Professor Sprout's notes. 1 handful, taken immediately before entering the water, gives you 57 minutes. I've been more precise than the general estimate, of full gill and webbing function. What's at the bottom of the lake? Harry asked. The Merpeople village. The hostages will be there. She spread parchment on the bench. The route down is approximately 40 meters through progressive cold and low visibility. Grindylows patrol the upper third in groups of 4 to 6. The Merpeople themselves won't be hostile. They've agreed to the task's parameters. They're essentially guardians of the hostages, not enemies. The challenge is time and the cold. And whatever Crouch has changed, Daphne said. Yes. Hermione's voice tightened slightly. We don't know what that is. The hostages? Harry said. Crumbs is someone from his school. Cedric's will be Cho, probably. Mine. He stopped. It was supposed to be Ron. Was? Daphne said. Moody said something last week. He said something about what was taken from each champion. Not who. What? Harry looked at the marks on his wrist. I think Crouch changed the hostages. Or added to them. Or, I think he's done something to make my retrieval harder specifically. The room went quiet. You think one of us is down there? Fleur said. I think it's possible. He looked at them. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, and I'm not going to prepare as if it isn't, because if I'm wrong it costs me nothing and if I'm right and I haven't prepared. He stopped. Then we prepare for it, Daphne said with perfect calm. What do you need? I need to be able to find people I know in a lake I can barely see in. He looked at Hermione. Can the bond help with that? Her eyes went to the ceiling, which was her thinking face. The directional sense. The compass. She came back down. It's weakest at distance. We've tested it to about 60 meters. That was the room to the lake surface exercise we did last week. The lake is 40 meters deep at the Merpeople village. A pause. If we're the hostages, and we're unconscious, I don't know if the bond signal carries through unconsciousness. It carries through sleep, Harry said. I can feel you all when I'm asleep. I tested it. You didn't tell me that, Hermione said. I'm telling you now. That's... She made the note. That suggests the signal is passive rather than active. It doesn't require conscious engagement on either end. She was already extrapolating. So yes. If we're down there, you'll be able to find us regardless. The question is whether the signal is strong enough to distinguish direction and distance at 40 meters of depth with 40 minutes of gillyweed time. 45. Harry said. Moody gave me 45. Crumb has an hour. I can work with 45 if I know where I'm going before I get in the water. Then we practice that, Daphne said. Tonight. They practiced it that night, and the night after, and every evening until the second task. Harry with his eyes closed on the Quidditch pitch, Hermione and Daphne and Fleur in different locations around the castle, Harry pointing exactly to each of them in turn without error by the 4th session. The signal was, as Hermione had hypothesized, completely passive. It ran like a river regardless of whether anyone was tending it, and with 6 weeks of bond maturation behind them it was clear and directional even at the several hundred meters of stone and corridor between the pitch and wherever Hermione was currently reading. On the morning of February 24th, Harry woke before dawn. The lake was visible from the boys' dormitory window, black and still in the pre-dawn, and he watched it while the rest of the dormitory slept and counted the pulse in his chest and thought about depth. He felt Hermione wake up. Not saw, felt, a distinct brightening in the bond signal, the particular quality of her consciousness coming online, ordered and immediate. Then Daphne, whose waking was different, slower, the still lake of her coming to surface. Then Fleur, whose waking was like light through a window, present and gold even at a distance. All 4 of them awake in the dark. None of them communicating directly, they didn't need to. The pulse ran between them, steady, and it was enough. The champions assembled at the lake's edge at 9 in the morning. The stands were full, the whole school, the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang delegations, Dumbledore and Karkaroff and Maxime at the judges' table. Bagman with his sonorous voice narrating for the crowd. The February air was brutal, cutting through dress robes and jackets alike, the lake's surface iron gray and indifferent. Harry stood between Cedric and Fleur and looked at the water and felt in his chest the 3 points of the compass. All 4 signals present. All 4 awake and aware. And then 2 of them changed. Not vanished, changed. Dulled. Like a light turned down low rather than extinguished. The specific quality of unconsciousness, which he'd learned to distinguish from sleep over the preceding weeks. Harry turned slowly. Around the stands he could see. He couldn't identify individuals at this distance, but he could feel direction. 2 of the compass points had moved. Down, and inward, and muted. 2 of them were already in the lake. He looked at Fleur. She was standing 2 people away from him, her expression composed, and he couldn't tell if she'd felt the same thing, but her hand, at her side, had closed into a loose fist, and she'd gone very still in a way that wasn't composure but was the very careful performance of it. "Champions," Bagman announced, "you will have 1 hour to retrieve what has been taken from you. The task begins." Harry was watching Fleur. Something was different about her signal. Not muted, not unconscious, but altered. Wrong. Now. Cedric went in immediately, bubblehead charm in place. Crumb transformed at the shoreline with the focused deliberateness of someone executing a planned approach. Harry pulled the gillyweed from his pocket, put it in his mouth. It tasted like something between seaweed and used boot, chewed and swallowed. The transformation was deeply unpleasant. It had been the first time he'd tested it in the bath 2 weeks ago, and it was unpleasant now, the gills splitting open at his neck, the breathable air suddenly thick and wrong, the imperative to be underwater overriding everything else. He went in. The cold was a physical impact. The lake's February temperature was something that even with gillyweed hit his body as a shock before the magic compensated. He went down, feet first, finned webbing pushing him with surprising efficiency. Visibility was approximately 3 meters, gray-green water with particles drifting, the light from the surface fading quickly. He checked the compass. Hermione was below him and to the east, approximately 35 meters. Daphne was below him and slightly further east, approximately 40 meters. Both unconscious, both present, both carrying the steady warmth of the bond. He oriented toward them and went down. The Grindylows found him at 20 meters. There were 8 of them, which was more than the upper patrol groups they'd observed during the task setup. Crouch's adjustment, Harry noted with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the water temperature. 8 of the small, vicious creatures, fast in the water, their thin fingers already reaching. One of them grabbed his ankle with a grip like wire. Harry didn't slow down. He pulled his wand from the waterproofed pocket Hermione had spelled and cast Relatio, not at the one holding him, at all 8 of them simultaneously, the spell fanning out in a pulse that the bond amplified before he'd consciously engaged with the reservoir, and all 8 Grindylows released whatever they were touching and shot backward in the water like they'd been thrown. They didn't come back. He kept going down. At 30 meters the visibility dropped further. The water was pressing, the cold deeper, the light from the surface now just a faint smear far above. He could see shapes below, the Merepeople village materializing out of the murk, stone pillars and structures, a civilization that had its own logic and its own ancient belonging. The hostages were tied to a stone pillar in the center of the village. Harry counted them as he approached. Ron, with his hair spreading in the water. Cho Chang, dark hair loose. A girl he recognized as Gabrielle Delacour, Fleur's little sister, 12 years old, which landed in his chest like something physical, and next to Gabrielle, tied between her and Ron, was someone he hadn't expected. Daphne. Daphne, eyes closed, dark hair drifting, completely still in the water. And to the other end of the line, Hermione, in the same state. Harry stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then he moved. He felt both of them through the bond, present, warm, unconscious. The pulse was steady. They were fine. Whatever had been used to put them under, it hadn't touched the bond's signal. He could feel them as clearly here as he could from the Quidditch pitch. He reached the pillar. The Merepeople were watching from the surrounding structures, the pale, grey-eyed, sharp-featured Merepeople of a Scottish loch, nothing like the mere creatures of warmer waters, regarding him with the focused stillness of beings who were neither hostile nor welcoming, just present. One of them, the chief, Harry recognized from the Wizengamot painting Hermione had shown him, held something that might have been a weapon and held it loosely, not raised, just present. Harry nodded to the merman. The merman blinked once, slowly, which felt like acknowledgement. He drew his wand and cut the bindings on Hermione first. The severing charm worked cleanly, and she drifted free, still unconscious, and Harry caught her arm. Then Daphne, the bindings caught in his other arm. Then he looked at the remaining 4, Ron, Cho, Gabrielle, and a 4th he didn't recognize, a boy from Durmstrang, and thought through the geometry of this. He had gillyweed time. He checked, had entered the water at approximately the same time as the others, which meant he had roughly 32 minutes remaining. More than enough. He could take Hermione and Daphne to the surface and come back for Ron. The Merepeople shifted. A ripple of movement through the watching group, and the chief moved forward 2 deliberate steps, and raised his weapon, still not aggressively, but pointed upward. Clear enough meaning. Take the ones designated yours. Leave the others. Harry looked at the 4 remaining hostages. Ron. Cho. Gabrielle. The Durmstrang boy. He looked at the Merepeople. He looked at his wrist, where the mark was faintly visible even in the dim water. Right, he said, which sounded ridiculous underwater and came out as a muffled rumble of bubbles, but he said it anyway because it helped him think. He looped Hermione's arm around his neck and did the same with Daphne, effectively making himself a core between them. Then he pointed his wand at all 4 remaining hostages, thought about what he was doing and what it would cost him in terms of task scoring and what it would cost him in terms of being able to live with himself, and decided that the second consideration made the first irrelevant. He cut all 4 sets of bindings. The hostages drifted free. He caught the smallest, Gabrielle, who was Fleur's sister and therefore his and who weighed less than he'd expected in the water, and maneuvered her against his side so he had all 3 of them and pointed upward and began to ascend. He would not make it to the surface alone carrying 3 people. He knew this mathematically before he'd completed the calculation. He was a strong swimmer even without the gillyweed enhancement, but the drag of 3 unconscious bodies in cold water against a 40-meter ascent with 30 minutes of gillyweed time and the Grindylows likely to return was a problem. He reached into the bond. Not carefully. Not the deliberate, exploratory reaching he'd practiced in the room of requirement. He reached the way you reach for something when you're falling, fast and complete, and with everything you have. The shared reservoir opened. What hit him was like standing in a river and suddenly having the whole river's force behind you. 3 sources of warmth, 3 distinct magical signatures, all of them running through his core simultaneously, and his body in the water stopped being a physical limitation and started being an extension of something much larger. The cold stopped being cold. The drag of 3 bodies stopped being drag. He went up through the water like something that belonged there, like something the lake was assisting rather than resisting, and the light from the surface grew and brightened, and then he was through it, bursting into February air that hit like a wall and filled his lungs with something that wasn't water, and the gills were sealing as he got there, the gillyweed's hour not yet expired but the transition smooth. He reached the shoreline. He pulled Hermione out first, then Daphne, then Gabrielle, all three of them onto the cold grass of the bank, and he was kneeling between them, water streaming off him, when Hermione gasped and came back to consciousness with the specific violence of someone surfacing from a very deep sleep. Then Daphne, quieter, her eyes opening with the still precision of a person who wakes and orients before they speak. Then Gabrielle, with a sound that was half cough and half alarm, sitting up and looking around with wide eyes. Harry put a hand on his knee, caught his breath, and looked up. The stands were very, very loud. He hadn't registered the crowd in any meaningful way until now. There'd been the task, the lake, the three people he was responsible for, the shared reservoir still warm and receding in his chest like a tide going out. But the stands were loud in a way that told him something had happened that was visually significant, and Bagman's voice was going through his sonorous with an incoherence that suggested Bagman had also been surprised. He looked at the lake. Cedric was coming in 20 meters down the shore, Cho conscious and beside him. Crumb was still in the water. Fleur was standing at the edge of the bank about 15 meters from him, dry, which meant she hadn't gone in, and her expression, she reached him in about 4 seconds. She didn't run exactly, but she moved like a wave moving, and she went directly to her sister first, dropped to her knees and took Gabrielle's face in her hands, speaking fast and low in French that Harry didn't need to translate. Then she looked at Harry. "You took all of them," she said. "I wasn't going to leave, Gabrielle. You were not supposed to. They would have been retrieved, the mere people would have. I know. I did it anyway." He looked at her. "You felt me reach for the reservoir?" "Yes." She'd been watching him with the full warmth behind her expression now, nothing performed, nothing held back. "Yes, I felt it. I needed the help." "I know. So did they." He nodded at Hermione and Daphne, both sitting up now, both processing. Hermione was looking at her hands with the expression of someone who had been unconscious and was re-establishing the parameters of consciousness, checking systems. Daphne was looking at Harry with an expression that he'd seen once before, briefly, on her face in the room of requirement, the one where she stopped calculating and just looked. "That was what was taken from me," Harry said. "Not Ron. Not just a friend." He let that land. "He changed it. Crouch. He put 2 of you down there instead of one person I'd want to save. He thought it would split my attention. Make me slower. More distracted." "It didn't," Daphne said, her voice steady and slightly rough from whatever had been used to put her under. "No. Because of the compass," Hermione said. "Because of the compass," Harry confirmed. "I knew exactly where you were from the moment I went in." Fleur was listening. Her eyes moved between all of them and then settled on Harry with something in them that was very close to the thing she'd had in her voice when she talked about Veela fire, the old water in a new pipe, familiar without precedent. "The scores?" Hermione said, already practical. "Taking all the hostages instead of just the designated ones." Bagman looked. "I don't care about the scores," Harry said. "I know you don't. I care about the scores. The scoring affects your standing in the tournament, which affects Hermione." He said it gently. "I'm fine. We're fine. Everything else is later." She stopped. Looked at him. Then at the others. Then, with visible effort, let go of the thread she'd been pulling and just sat on the cold grass beside a lake in February with ice on her sleeves and let that be enough for a moment. Crumb arrived at the bank, partial transfiguration reversed, the Durmstrang boy conscious beside him. He looked at Harry. He looked at Daphne and Hermione on the grass. His evaluating seeker's gaze moved across the scene with the focused calculation of someone assessing what happened. He walked over. "You took all the hostages," he said. His English was accented, careful. "Yes," Harry said. "That will cost you points." "Probably." Krum looked at him. Something shifted in the Bulgarian's expression. Not warm, Krum didn't do warm, but something that might have been the beginning of respect. You knew where they were before you got in? He said, not quite a question. Yes. The bond. Krum glanced at Harry's wrist, at the mark. He noticed it before this. Harry had caught him noticing it twice in the past weeks, in the brief intersections their tournament schedules created, but this was the first direct acknowledgement. It was useful. It was essential, Harry said without defensiveness. Krum nodded once. I wondered, when I read about it in Karkaroff's library, whether it was real. He looked out at the lake. I have my answer. He walked back toward the Durmstrang delegation without ceremony. The scoring came out an hour later. Dumbledore and Bagman and the other judges had debated at the table with the particular energy of people who had not prepared for this specific situation and were having to improvise their framework. Harry had scored second highest, behind Cedric, whose approach had been clean and fast and confined to his designated hostage, but ahead of Krum and significantly ahead of where Crouch had presumably intended him to be. Bagman had awarded bonus points for retrieving Gabrielle specifically, who had still been tied when Fleur hadn't made it into the water. Fleur hadn't made it into the water because she'd been attacked by Grindylows at the surface and hexed before she could submerge, not standard Grindylow behavior, and Harry's money was firmly on magical interference with the task parameters, and had spent 40 minutes on the bank in a state that was close enough to panic for Fleur that it counted, watching the lake's surface and feeling her sister unconscious below it. You saved her, Fleur said quietly, as they were walking back to the castle with the crowds moving around them. The bond knew where she was, Harry said. I just followed it. That is not a small thing. No. But you'd have done the same. I would have, she said. But you did. She walked beside him with her shoulder close to his, and the February wind came off the lake behind them, and the stands were emptying around them, and somewhere ahead of them the castle stood with all its warmth and all its complications, and she said, very quietly, in a tone he'd learned to recognize as the one she used for things she'd decided to say rather than things that slipped out, I am glad the magic chose you. Harry kept walking. Let the words settle. Felt the pulse in his chest, 4 beats steady. I'm glad it chose all of you, he said. On the steps of the castle, 3 ahead of them, Hermione was already talking to Daphne about the scoring methodology and what it meant for the third task, parchment produced from somewhere, and Daphne was listening with one hand in her pocket and one eyebrow slightly raised, and the quality of the exchange between them had changed since September in ways Harry couldn't have fully itemized but could feel the shape of clearly. The distance that had always been there, Gryffindor and Slytherin, the categories that divided everyone at Hogwarts into predetermined relationships, had eroded into something that wasn't just tolerance, wasn't just functional alliance, was something more honest than either. Neville met Harry at the entrance hall door. He'd come down from the stands and his face had the expression of someone who had watched something he didn't have words for yet. I saw you come out of the water, he said. You had. He pointed at the space on either side where Hermione and Daphne had been. You just explained later, Harry said. Right. Neville looked at him with something earnest and uncomplicated. You're brilliant, you know. I mean that. I know everyone says it for the wrong reasons usually, but I mean. He gestured at the lake behind them. That. I had help, Harry said. I know. That's what I mean. Neville's voice had a quality Harry didn't hear often from him, clarity, the sound of someone saying exactly what they think without checking whether it's correct first. You went in with people behind you and you went further because of it. That's the... He stopped himself. Sorry. I'm rabbiting. No, Harry said. You're right. That's exactly what it is. He went inside. The castle closed around him, stone and warmth and the smell of old magic, and below the lake returned to its own purposes, carrying its depths and its mere people and its Grindylows and everything Crouch had placed in it, and above the February sky was the flat gray of a day that had required everything and delivered everything, and Harry counted the pulse in his chest, 4 beat, warm, steady, and went to find lunch. In his pocket, his wand was warm. On his wrist, the mark was warm. Ahead of him, 3 compass points moved through the castle's corridors toward the great hall, each one distinct, each one clear, each one carrying the quality of a person he was beginning to know the way you know geography, not just the shape of it on a map, but the way it feels under your feet. In a room somewhere in the castle, in borrowed skin that almost fit, something ancient and patient and dangerous watched the tournament proceed and adjusted its calculations. The boy had been in the lake for 38 minutes. He had retrieved 6 people where he was supposed to struggle to retrieve 1. The calculations required adjustment. Chapter 5. The council comes. Fleur Delacour arrived on a Thursday morning in March with a single traveling bag, no announcement, and the absolute authority of a woman who had decided something. Harry was crossing the entrance hall when she walked through the main doors, and he knew immediately who she was, not because she looked like Fleur, though she did, the same silver-gold hair and the same bones in her face, but because she moved the way Fleur moved when Fleur wasn't performing anything for anyone. The same quality of self-possession that had nothing to do with looking a certain way and everything to do with occupying space as if it had always been yours. She was carrying the traveling bag in one hand and a letter in the other, and her eyes swept the entrance hall with the rapid precision of someone assessing a new environment for what mattered and dismissing what didn't. They landed on Harry with no hesitation. "You are Harry Potter," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment with the complete, unfiltered attention of someone who had no reason to be polite about their evaluation. Then she said, "Good," and walked past him toward the stairs. Harry sent a pulse through the bond. The signal that meant come now, not urgent but soon. Fleur's response was immediate, a flare of warmth, recognition, and something complex that might have been oh no, or might have been finally, or might have been both simultaneously. They converged in the room off the entrance hall that had, over the past weeks, become their default meeting space. The 4 of them had had enough conversations in it that it had acquired a quality of familiarity. The chairs arranged the way they preferred, the window cracked despite the March cold because Hermione thought better with fresh air and nobody had argued with her. Apollon was already in the room when Harry arrived, having found it without any guidance, which he suspected was the bond's directional sense working through Fleur even at this distance. She stood at the window looking out at the grounds and turned when they came in, and her eyes moved across all 4 of them with the same unhurried, total assessment she'd given Harry in the entrance hall, and Harry watched her face as she took in Fleur, the specific expression a parent makes when they see their child and find them better than they'd feared, or better than they knew, or better in a way they'd hoped for but hadn't let themselves count on. Fleur crossed the room and her grandmother held her face in both hands and said something low in French that Harry didn't catch, and Fleur said something back, and for one moment the composure that Fleur wore like a second skin was entirely absent, replaced by something younger and more unguarded and completely real. Then they separated and Apollon turned to the rest of them with the manner of a woman who had allotted sufficient time to feeling and was now ready for business. "Sit," she said. Not unkindly. "I have things to tell you that cannot wait." They sat. Apollon remained standing. She set the letter she'd been carrying on the table between them, and Harry saw it was already open, written in a hand he didn't recognize, the French crawling across the page in a compressed, urgent script. "Seraphine Vauquelin," Apollon said, "is not the problem I told Fleur she was. I believed, when I wrote to Fleur after the ball, that Vauquelin was a political obstacle, ambitious, controlling, the usual character of someone who rises to council leadership by making others feel they cannot function without her guidance." She looked at the letter. "I was wrong. Or rather, I was right about what she is and wrong about what she wants." "What does she want?" Daphne said. "She wants the bond registered, yes. But registration is not the end. Registration is the instrument." Apollon finally sat, folding her hands on the table with the deliberateness of someone about to say something they have thought about carefully. "There is a provision in the Veela Ancestral Compact, Article 19, it has not been invoked in 60 years, that allows the Council to assume guardianship of a Veela bond if the bonded Veela is deemed incapable of managing the bond's implications. The threshold for this determination is intentionally vague. She looked at Fleur. If the bond is registered, they can argue for Article 19 on the basis that you are 17, in the middle of a dangerous competition, and that the bond's amplification poses risks to non-Veela around you. That's fabricated, Hermione said. It is fabricated and it is legally viable, Apollon said. The compact is old enough that its interpretation is flexible in the hands of the right magistrate. And Vauquelin has the right magistrate. What does guardianship give them? Harry asked. Control over the bond's development. The right to require separation of the bonded parties if the council determines separation is in the Veela's interest. The right to appoint a council overseer who must be present for any joint magical working. She said each item flatly, like reading from a list of injuries. In practice, it breaks the bond's development. A triad matures through proximity and shared experience, you know this. Remove that proximity, require an overseer, and the bond does not mature. It stagnates. The four of you remain what you are now rather than what you are becoming. The room was quiet. That's the actual goal, Harry said. Not registration. Stagnation. Apollon looked at him. A stagnated triad is manageable. A mature triad is not. Whatever they told you in that first meeting, all of it was designed to achieve registration. Registration opens Article 19. Article 19 opens the door to everything else. Who wrote the letter? Daphne asked, nodding at the page on the table. Renée Beaumont, Apollon said. She sent it to me 3 days ago. She is on the council, but she is not of the faction that drives it. She has been watching Vauquelin's maneuvers for 2 years and has been looking for the moment to act against them. A slight pause. She believes that moment is now. That this bond, and the four of you, are sufficient leverage to shift the council's composition. She wants us to be her political instrument, Daphne said, without any particular heat. She wants to use a situation that is already in motion, Apollon said, and there was a precision in her voice that suggested she'd considered and accepted the distinction. What happens to you is not her primary concern. What she wants is Vauquelin's faction reduced. Whether those two things align is something you must determine. Harry looked at the letter. He couldn't read it, but he looked at it anyway, at the urgency in the script. What does she need from us? She needs a public demonstration of the bond that falls outside council jurisdiction. Something that makes Article 19 arguments look absurd, because you cannot argue that a bond is dangerous and unmanageable and simultaneously point to evidence of its stability, its control, its value. Apollon's eyes moved to Harry with a directness he was beginning to think was simply the Delacour mode of communication. She needs you to be visibly and undeniably what you are. Before the third task. The third task? Hermione said slowly. That's the maze. In June, Harry said. 2 months, Daphne said. We have 2 months to develop the bond to the point where it constitutes a public demonstration of controlled, stable power. She paused. That's also exactly the time we need to prepare for the third task. Which may be the same project, Fleur said. Everyone looked at her. She met Harry's eyes. Beaumont wants a demonstration. The third task will be a demonstration. Whatever Crouch has planned, it will not be quiet. If we go into that maze as what we are and come out as what we are. She tilted her head slightly. The whole magical world will see it. That's either brilliant or extremely dangerous, Hermione said. Both, Daphne said. Which is usually the profile of good plans. Apollon watched this exchange with the expression of someone observing something that confirms a belief they've held privately. Then she looked at Harry and said, My granddaughter's letters about you have been informative. I had my own thoughts about the anchor the magic might choose, and you have been. She stopped. Reconsidered. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who knew they were powerful. She held his gaze. Someone who led with it. Most people who carry what you carry lead with it, even the ones who don't intend to. I don't think power is what's interesting about the bond, Harry said. Apollon was quiet for a moment. Then, with a warmth that was entirely genuine and surprised him slightly. No. It is not. She stayed for 2 days. She worked with Fleur privately for hours at a time. Harry felt the sessions through the bond as warmth and the specific quality of Veela magic being handled directly, fire not suppressed but shaped, the old water in the old channel with someone experienced guiding it. Whatever Apollon was teaching, Fleur came out of each session looser, more present, the careful held-back qualities she wore in public progressively less necessary. She also, on the second morning, sat with all 4 of them for 3 hours and told them things about the Triad bond that were not in any text Hermione had found. The things not in the texts were not in the texts because they had been removed. Apollon said this plainly. She had documents, copies of pages from the Veela family archives, handwritten in the style of the 14th century, the ink brown and faded but the handwriting precise. The documents described the last known triad in detail, not the politically suppressed one from 15th century France that Hermione had found, but an earlier one, from 1312, in what was now southern Germany, at the border of the Muggle world and the Wizarding one. For people. An anchor who was, by the document's description, a young wizard who had survived a killing curse as an infant, not a direct comparison. Harry was not historically unique in that sense. There had been other survivors of other dark curses in the centuries before Voldemort, and 3 bonded, 1 Veela, 1 human witch, 1 human wizard who in this triad's case had been male. Which Apollon noted with the tone of someone acknowledging that the bond had no gender preferences and the council's discomfort with this was their own problem. The triad of 1312 had, according to Apollon's documents, faced a specific kind of dark magic that the document called La Magie de Division, divisive magic. Magic designed to fracture, to isolate, to cut connections between people. The wizard who had been casting it had been operating for decades and had accumulated a following and had been, by the accounts telling, functionally unkillable by conventional means because he had anchored pieces of his soul to physical objects and distributed them, and the destruction of his body merely delayed him. The room was very quiet when Apollon said this. Harry looked at his hands. The triad, Hermione said carefully, destroyed him? The triad, Apollon said, could find the anchored pieces. The anchor's ability to sense what was connected to him, expanded through the bond, allowed the triad to locate and destroy each anchor point in sequence. She paused. The document's word for the objects is Al-Horcrux. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a word. Daphne had gone very still in the way she went still when something significant was happening that she was choosing to process before responding. Fleur was watching Harry. Harry was looking at the document. At the faded handwriting. At the word Al-Horcrux sitting in the middle of a paragraph written 700 years ago. I need to ask you something, he said to Apollon. Ask. The anchor in 1312. The one who survived the curse. He kept his voice level. What the curse left behind. Did the document mention anything about what the curse left behind in him? Apollon looked at him for a long moment. Her expression held a quality he hadn't seen in it before, something that was the distant echo of grief, or of foreknowledge, which was sometimes the same thing. Yes, she said. It mentioned a fragment. Something that did not belong to him but resided in him. She held his gaze. It mentioned that the bond helped him carry it until the time came when it could be properly addressed. Nobody in the room moved. How was it addressed? Harry asked. The document, Apollon said, is incomplete at that section. The pages are missing. She looked at him steadily. I believe they were removed by someone who preferred the answer not be known. The silence stretched. Then Hermione said, in a voice that was extremely controlled, Harry, we need to talk about what that means. I know what it means, Harry said. You've known, Daphne said. Not accusatory. Just observing. I've suspected. Since 3rd year after, there was a situation with the Dementor, and what happened when it got close was... He stopped. Started again. There's something in me that's not mine. I've known it was there without knowing what it was. I know what it is now. Fleur's hand closed over his on the table. Not saying anything. Just closing. Harry let it stay. Then that's the longer problem, Daphne said, and her voice was the steady, practical voice she used when she was refusing to let emotion make a situation less manageable. That's not today's problem. Today's problem is Vauquelin and the third task and Crouch. The longer problem we address in sequence. She looked at Harry. Yes? Yes, Harry said. Good. She looked at Apollon. Beaumont needs a demonstration. What specifically constitutes one from her perspective? Apollon looked at Daphne with the same expression she'd given Harry in the entrance hall, the total assessment. Then she said, she needs something public, controlled, and powerful. Something that creates a record, witnessed by people who can speak to it. Something the council cannot look at and say the bond is unstable or dangerous or requiring of their management. The Wisengamot has observers at the third task, Hermione said, thinking out loud. Bagman sends official reports. The ministry attendance list for the third task includes 2 Department of Magical Law Enforcement seniors and 3 members of the International Confederation's liaison team. She looked at her notes, which she'd been making throughout, because Hermione took notes the way other people breathed. If something happens at the third task that is visibly attributable to the bond and is visibly extraordinary and controlled, it becomes part of the official record, Daphne said. Not a rumor. Not a sighting. An official ministry record. Which Vauquelin cannot touch, Fleur said. She has council authority. The ministry is outside it. Then we need to make sure something extraordinary and controlled happens at the third task, Harry said. That shouldn't be difficult, Daphne said. Given that Crouch has been modifying the tasks to kill you and whatever he's built into the maze will presumably provide sufficient context for something extraordinary. There's that, Harry agreed. Apollon left on Thursday afternoon. She embraced Fleur at the door with a thoroughness that communicated a great deal about both of them. The grandmother who was also the keeper of old knowledge, the granddaughter who had been given something valuable and intended to use it properly. Then she turned to Harry and held his face in both hands the way she'd held Fleur's and looked at him with her direct silver-blue eyes and said, in English and without ceremony, "You are the center. Do not forget it. Not because you are more important than the others, you are not. But because the center is what holds when everything else moves. Be the thing that holds." Harry didn't say anything. He just nodded and meant it. She walked out through the main doors and the morning sun hit her silver-gold hair, and she went down the steps without looking back, and Fleur watched her go with an expression that was love and something very like pride. The weeks between March and the third task were the most intensive period of the bond's development, and the room of requirement during those weeks had the quality of a place where real things were happening, not practice runs at real things, but real things, with the urgency that comes from knowing the timeline. They worked the conduit casting until it was fluid. Fleur had developed, with Apollon's guidance, the capacity to push Veela fire through the bond to Harry with a precision that meant he could channel it wandlessly with the specific qualities of Veela flame rather than standard magical fire, hotter, more selective, more responsive to intent. Hermione had developed something she called resonance reading, drawing on the bond's shared sense to enhance her ability to read the magical signature of objects and spaces, which had extensive applications she not yet fully mapped, and which the text had described as the most intellectually powerful aspect of a bonded scholar in a triad. Daphne, who had been the quietest about her development, had revealed in the 5th week that she'd been working on something she described as stillpoint, which was the bond's signal used in reverse, instead of receiving information from the others, using the pulse as an anchor to hold herself completely steady in high-stress situations. A kind of magical composure that extended to her spellwork and made her extraordinarily difficult to rattle. Harry had been watching Daphne's stillpoint develop with particular attention, because he'd begun to understand that she was using the bond for something more than magical amplification. She was using it as the thing she'd described wanting that night by the library, the room inside herself where she could just be rather than calculate. The bond, for Daphne, was becoming a home base. A place from which she operated rather than toward which she was trying to get. He mentioned this to her in passing on a Wednesday evening when they were the last two in the room of requirement, the others having left for dinner. She considered it for longer than usual. Then she said, "You notice things. Sometimes. Most people don't notice things about me. They notice how I present." She sat on the floor, which was something she never did at the start of their sessions and now did regularly, which was its own data point. "You notice differently. The bond helps. The bond gives you access to something. What you do with the access is still you." She pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, which made her look about 12 years old and nothing like the Ice Queen of Slytherin and entirely like the person Harry had been getting to know over 3 months of close quarters. "My father wrote." Harry waited. "He knows. He found out through the pureblood grapevine. Someone at the ministry saw the mark, or someone talked. It traveled the way those things travel." She looked at the floor. He was measured about it. He's always measured. He said he wanted to understand what it meant for the family. He used the word opportunity 4 times in a 2-page letter, which is his way of saying he's already figured out 3 ways to extract value from this situation and is working on a 4th. "What did you write back?" Harry said. "I told him I'd handle my own affairs." She paused. "He won't accept that. He'll come in person at some point. Probably before the end of term." She looked up at Harry. "I want you to trust me to handle him when he does." "I trust you." "I know you do. I'm asking you to also not assume it requires intervention. Whatever he does, whatever he says, let me manage it. I know him. I know where the pressure points are and I know how to navigate him without escalating." She held his gaze. "You have a tendency to step in front of things on behalf of people. It is a quality I genuinely appreciate. It is also a quality that, in this specific case, would give my father exactly the leverage point he's looking for." Harry thought about this. Stepping in front would give him the angle. "The Harry Potter is running my daughter narrative," Daphne said dryly. "He'd take it to every conservative pure-blood family in Britain and have it reshaped as an anti-Muggle-born political project within a fortnight. He wouldn't mean harm by it. He'd think he was protecting us. That makes it more dangerous, not less." "Right," Harry said. "So I watch, and I trust you, and I'm there if the situation changes." "Yes." A brief pause. "Thank you." Outside the room, in the corridor, Draco Malfoy was waiting. Not for Harry, or not originally for Harry, probably. Daphne had been the target. But Harry came out alongside her and Draco's expression went through 3 rapid phases: the default sneer, the recalibration of finding 2 people instead of 1, and then the slightly less confident sneer of someone who'd prepared for a different audience. "Greengrass," Draco said. "Malfoy," Daphne said with the specific neutrality of 2 Slytherins acknowledging each other in the corridor, which contained volumes of social information in 2 words and a tone. "Your father is asking about you," Draco said. "Through my father. Which you probably know. I probably do. And you're not concerned. I'm not performing concern for your benefit, no." She looked at him with the still-point composure she'd been developing, the perfect undisturbed surface. "Was there something specific?" Draco's eyes moved to Harry. The sneer settled into something more complicated, not the contempt he usually directed at Harry, but the expression of someone who had been observing a situation and found it more complex than expected. "You 2 are, there are 4 of us," Harry said pleasantly. "Did you need something?" Draco looked between them. His father was Lucius Malfoy, who was a Death Eater in everything but current documented status, who moved through wizarding political circles with the kind of influence that came from money and the implicit threat of violence, and the memory of what he'd been willing to do in the last war. Harry had never feared Draco, had found him irritating, had found him cruel in the specific way of people who'd been taught that cruelty was authority. But right now he looked at Draco and felt no hostility and no contempt, just the clear-eyed recognition of someone who was, in certain fundamental ways, a victim of his own inheritance. Tell your father, Daphne said to Draco, without heat, that I'm well and that I'll write when I have something worth saying. She walked past him. Harry followed. Behind them, Draco said nothing, and the silence had the quality of someone standing in a corridor trying to work out what just happened. The days compacted as they moved toward June. Exams, which Hermione managed with the combination of personal academic intensity and the bond's amplification making her ability to retain and cross-reference information genuinely alarming. She sat her OWL preparatory assessments and produced results that made Professor McGonagall look at the parchment for a long moment before looking at Hermione and saying, with precise understatement, "Well done." Harry's own classwork had improved markedly, which he credited honestly to the bond's effect on his ability to concentrate, and to the specific quality of studying alongside someone for whom excellence was a reflex. Daphne had been quietly tutoring him in potions for 6 weeks without framing it as tutoring. She just had a tendency to ask him questions about processes and then wait with patient precision for him to work through the answer himself, which was a more effective teaching method than Snape had managed in 4 years. They didn't talk about Voldemort again after Apollin's visit. Not because they were avoiding it, but because there was a shared instinct in the bond about sequence. Deal with what's in front of you, deal with the thing after it, don't let the long problems swallow the immediate ones. Harry trusted this. He'd always had to face the next thing without the luxury of fully processing the previous one, and there was something different about doing it with the bond's warmth behind him, with 3 compass points present at all times. It didn't make the problem smaller. It made the carrying of it less solitary. A week before the 3rd task, Vauquelin sent a letter. It arrived by Council Owl, formal stationery, the Veela Council seal in silver wax, addressed to Fleur and, this time, to Harry as well. 2 separate letters with identical content. Hermione read them both, translated the French sections for Harry, and then set them on the table and said, "She's invoking a pre-hearing. Before the task? She wants a formal pre-hearing under council authority to determine whether the bond should be registered prior to a high-risk event." "The task is the high-risk event," Daphne said. "The argument being that if something goes wrong during the task, an unregistered bond in an unstable state creates unmanageable risk for everyone involved." Hermione's voice was perfectly level in the way that meant she was furious. "She has 4 days to convene it under compact rules. Which means she's calling it for 3 days before the maze," Harry said. "Yes." He picked up the letter. Looked at Vauquelin's neat, formal signature. Looked at the window, at the grounds, at the forbidden forest in the distance, where a year ago he'd ridden a hippogriff into the sunset with his godfather, and thought that things might be about to get better. He thought about Beaumont's letter to Apollon. He thought about the Triad of 1312 and documents with missing pages. He thought about a young wizard who had survived something that should have killed him, and had carried a fragment of someone else's soul for years and had not known, until someone who loved him thought to look, what to do about it. He thought about 4-beat pulses and fire that had been suppressed building pressure. "We go to the pre-hearing," he said. Hermione looked up. "We go, and we bring Beaumont's letter, and Apollon's documents, and every piece of research you've compiled, and we walk in as what we are and we let Vauquelin see exactly what she's trying to manage." He set the letter down. "And then we make clear that there is nothing left to manage." "You want to be the demonstration," Fleur said. "Beaumont needs a witnessed, recorded event. A formal council pre-hearing is official. It has a scribe. It has documentation. It goes into the council's records." He looked at all of them. "If what we do in that hearing constitutes a demonstration of a stable, mature, powerful bond operated by 4 people who are in complete control of what they have, it goes into the record. Before the task. Before anything else." Daphne was looking at him with the expression she'd worn in the lake's entrance hall the morning after the ball, the evaluating, assessing look that was progressively giving way to something that didn't evaluate at all. "The hearing is in 3 days," she said. "Then we have 3 days." "To do what exactly?" Hermione asked. "To be exactly what we are," Harry said. "I don't think we need to practice that at this point. The room of requirement, when they walked into it that evening, gave them something new. It had done this occasionally. The first week it had produced training equipment, the second week a library section, the third week, inexplicably, a very comfortable couch that Hermione had used for reading and nobody had questioned because the couch was clearly right. Tonight it gave them a high-ceilinged space with no furniture at all and windows open to the evening sky and the stone warm underfoot. They stood in the center of it, and the evening light came through the windows in long golden bars and the pulse ran between them, 4 beat and deep, and Harry thought 3 days. "Show me the conduit," he said to Fleur. She raised her hands and the fire came, golden white, precise, woven. She pushed it through the bond and Harry received it, and held it, wandless, in both hands, feeling its temperature and its intelligence, feeling it respond to intent with the responsiveness of something that had learned him over the months of their bond, that recognized his magic as familiar. Hermione was beside him, her resonance reading active, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the bond routing through her like a current through a clear wire, her sharpness and her precision and the enormous organized weight of everything she'd learned, available. Daphne was behind him in the still point, which was not stillness but the most dynamic kind of groundedness, her magic running like deep water, the anchor's anchor, and Harry felt it at the base of his own magic and understood why the bond had chosen her, not because she was the most powerful among them individually but because she was the most stable, the fixed point around which everything else could move freely. The fire in Harry's hands rose. The room responded, the stone warmer, the evening light brighter, the windows throwing gold across 4 people standing in a circle and knowing, for the first time with full clarity, the complete shape of what they were. Not 4 people with a shared connection. One thing with 4 minds. One thing that had been waiting for a very long time to be assembled from its components, that had moved through history and fragments and records and missing pages and firelit grandmother stories, and that was, in a cold floored room in a Scottish castle in 1995, finally whole. Harry closed his hands around the fire, and the room held its breath, and the pulse in his chest was not 4 beats but 1. Chapter 6. The maze and what waits beyond the pre-hearing happened on a Tuesday, which Harry was beginning to think was simply the universe's preferred day for significant events, and it happened in the same receiving room where they'd met Vauquelin in January, except this time the room was fuller. Vauquelin had brought both of her companions and 2 additional council members. An older man Harry hadn't seen before, thin and precise in the way of someone who had spent decades being useful through paperwork rather than action, and René Beaumont, who sat at the far end of the council bench and met Harry's eyes when he came in with an expression that communicated "I know what this is and I'm ready" in a single steady look. Dumbledore was there. He sat to one side in an observer's chair with the manner of someone who has decided to watch rather than direct, and Harry looked at him once, and then didn't look again. Professor McGonagall was beside him, ramrod straight, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was prepared to have strong feelings about whatever happened. The council's scribe sat at a small desk with fresh parchment, quill poised. Harry sat in the center chair. The others arranged themselves as they always did, Fleur left, Hermione and Daphne right, and the room settled into the specific attention of people who understood that what was about to happen would be documented. Vauquelin looked at the 4 of them, and something had changed in her face since January. The political composure was intact, but it was carrying more weight now, the way a wall carries more weight when what's on the other side of it has grown. "We convened this pre-hearing," she began, "under Article 12 of the Veela Ancestral Compact, to determine whether, Councilwoman," Harry said pleasantly. She stopped. "Before you continue, I'd like to note for the record that Councilwoman Beaumont is present, and that under the Compact's own charter of impartiality, any pre-hearing regarding a bond of Veela origin requires a minimum of 1 council member with documented independent scholarship on the bond type in question." He looked at Beaumont. "Councilwoman Beaumont has 3 published essays on triad bond theory. Her presence satisfies that requirement. Her voice should be part of the formal record." The thin man with the paperwork quality looked at Vauquelin. Something passed between them. Beaumont said in a composed, warm voice with the quality of someone who had been waiting for their cue. "Noted for the record." She looked at the scribe, who wrote it down. Vauquelin began again. The formal language was dense and procedural, and Harry let it wash over him and focused instead on what was happening in the bond, Hermione absorbing every word with the precision of someone who would reconstruct the entire hearing from memory, Daphne in her stillpoint, the presence of her like bedrock beneath the conversation's surface. Fleur sitting with a quality of self-possession that was different from the composed performance she'd worn in January, something deeper and more settled. The fire not suppressed but present, contained by understanding rather than force. The hearing's formal section was Vauquelin's argument for registration under Article 8 and her preliminary framing of Article 19. She made the argument well, she was intelligent, and she had done her preparation, and the logic was internally coherent if you accepted her premises, which Harry didn't, and which he'd spent 3 days being very precise about why. The bond, Vauquelin said, is undeniably present and active. Our concern is its stability during an event of significant magical and physical risk. The third task of the Triwizard Tournament constitutes exactly the kind of high-stress environment in which an immature, unregistered bond can. It's not immature, Harry said. Vauquelin paused. I beg your pardon? The bond. You're characterizing it as immature. I'd like to address that characterization, because it's the load-bearing premise of your Article 19 argument, and I don't think the record should proceed without it being examined. He kept his voice conversational, not combative. Hermione. Hermione opened her bag. She produced a stack of parchment that she set on the table. Beaumont's eyes went to it immediately, and she said, The Council's own definitions of bond maturity stages are documented in the Compact's appendix. The criteria for a Stage 3 bond, which is the threshold that removes any basis for an Article 19 claim, are synchronized pulse, active conduit capacity between at least 2 bonded parties, demonstrated shared reservoir access, and anchor engagement with the full combined core. She looked up from the parchment. We met the Stage 3 criteria approximately 5 weeks ago. The thin man leaned toward Vauquelin. Vauquelin did not lean back. We would require demonstration, Vauquelin said. Yes, Harry said. We know. What happened next lasted approximately 4 minutes and was, the scribe later wrote in the official record. Harry would obtain a copy eventually, through Beaumont, who sent it with a letter that contained 3 sentences of text and a great deal of warmth between the lines, the most complete display of triad bond function witnessed by the Council in recorded history. Harry didn't think about it in those terms while it was happening. While it was happening, he was simply doing what they were, being what they were, the way you don't think about breathing while you breathe. He reached into the shared core and pulled, not the way he'd pulled in the lake in February with the urgency of a drowning man, but the way he'd pulled in the room of requirement 3 days ago with the evening light through the windows, fully, steadily, with complete clarity about what he was doing. The room changed. Not dramatically. Not explosively. The change was in quality rather than in visible effect, the air acquiring a weight and a warmth that was distinctly magical, the kind of presence that very experienced magical people can feel without any visible indicator. Several of the council members straightened in their seats without knowing why. Fleur's fire was in his hands, wandless, golden white, palm-sized, burning clean and cool and entirely without menace. Hermione's resonance reading was running, and she said calmly, The magical signature of this room has just changed. The stone is responding. The room recognizes the bond. Which was true. The castle, Harry had learned over months, was a living magical entity in the way that very old places with very long histories of magic saturating their walls become living entities, and the castle knew them now the way it knew its resident ghosts, and its headmaster, and the specific quality of its founder's enchantments. It responded to the bond the way a tuning fork responds to a matching note, a resonance, a recognition. Daphne, in her still point, was a fixed point in the room that everything else anchored to without the everything else knowing that was what it was doing. Harry could feel it, the way her groundedness affected the room's magical atmosphere, stabilizing it, making the demonstration clean and readable rather than overwhelming. The fire in his hands brightened once, precisely, and then settled. He closed his hands and the fire went out, and the room returned to its ordinary quality. The scribe was writing. Beaumont was looking at Harry with an expression that was carefully contained but was, in its containment, expressing something significant. Vauquelin was quiet for a long moment. Stage 3, Beaumont said, into the silence, for the record. Demonstrated and witnessed. The thin man said something to Vauquelin in rapid French. She answered without looking at him, still looking at Harry. Whatever they said, the paperwork quality of the conversation told Harry the argument had shifted into territory where the paperwork man lived, and the paperwork man was managing a problem rather than pursuing a goal. I would like, Vauquelin said at last, in a tone that had lost most of its political architecture, and was something closer to the unadorned voice of someone who has genuinely encountered something they hadn't expected and is deciding what to do with it. To speak with Mademoiselle Delacour. Privately. Not as a council matter. She looked at Fleur. As a Veela elder to a Veela girl who has done something extraordinary. 5 minutes. Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at Vauquelin for a long moment. Then at Harry. Then she nodded once, and said to Harry with the particular directness she used when she meant something completely. It is all right. He and Hermione and Daphne waited in the corridor. Dumbledore passed them on his way out of the room and stopped, briefly, and looked at all three of them with his blue eyes and the expression Harry had last seen at the end of their meeting in February. Reassessment, the quiet recalibration of a man who had thought he understood something and found it larger than his model. He said nothing. He walked on. He knows, Hermione said quietly. He's always known, Daphne said. Knowing and responding to our different things. Right now he's choosing to let it proceed. Why? Harry said. Because he's intelligent, Daphne said simply. And because whatever he has planned, a mature triad that can do what we just did in that room is a more useful element than a dependent 14-year-old. He's updating his plan around us. That's cold, Harry said. It's accurate, Daphne said. Both can be true. Fleur came out after 6 minutes. Her expression was composed, but there was something underneath it that was moving, something that had shifted in the private conversation. She looked at Harry and said, Vauquelin will not pursue Article 19. A pause. She said that the bond chose well and that the Council has an obligation to protect what is genuine rather than manage what is inconvenient. Another pause. She said she is sorry for the things she said when I was 8. Harry let that sit. That was more than 5 minutes of conversation, Hermione said gently. Yes, Fleur said. And then, very quietly, she knew my grandmother. A long time ago they were close. Before the politics. She looked at the wall. It is complicated to be old, I think. You collect more regrets than a young person can imagine carrying. Nobody said anything else about Vauquelin. 3 days later was the third task. The maze had been constructed on the Quidditch pitch, and it was extraordinary, and it was wrong. Harry could feel the wrongness from the entrance. The hedges were 20 feet high, dense with a magic that was not passive decoration but active interference, and the quality of the magical atmosphere inside was the kind that experienced practitioners called contaminated, as if something had been woven into the task's design that didn't belong there. Hermione felt it through the resonance reading and put her hand briefly on Harry's arm as the champions assembled, and the crowd filled the stands and Bagman explained the rules. Dumbledore was at the judges' table. He was watching Harry. Crouch, the real Crouch, Bartemius Crouch Sr., had been found 2 weeks earlier in a state of magical exhaustion and incoherence on the castle grounds, and Dumbledore had moved with quiet, urgent purpose in the days after, and Moody had been in the hospital wing for a period that had not been officially explained. And then Moody had resumed his duties with the specific quality of someone who had been reminded of something important, and Harry had looked at Moody every day since and understood, with the bond's enhanced sensitivity to magical signatures, that Moody's magical signature was not a single thing but a layered thing, an overlay, like a voice coming through a voice, and had told the others, and Hermione had gone pale in a specific way, and Daphne had said Polyjuice. And Fleur had said who is underneath, and Harry had said I don't know yet but I intend to find out, and had spent the 2 weeks before the task watching Moody with the focused, patient attention of someone who has been in the same position before and learned from it. "The Triwizard Cup is at the center of the maze," Bagman announced. "First champion to touch the cup wins the tournament. Champions, take your positions." Harry stood at his entrance. Fleur was 2 entrances down. Cedric across. Krum at the 4th point. Through the bond, Harry sensed something that wasn't a word and wasn't quite an emotion, more like a sound, the sound of a note held steady, the ground note beneath everything. 3 responses came back, each one distinct. Fleur's fire, warm and present. Hermione in the stands, resonance reading active, sending back the mapped quality of the maze's outer sections with extraordinary clarity. She'd been tracking the magical signature of the maze since it was constructed, and she had what amounted to a partial map of its enchantments encoded in the bond's shared space. Daphne, steady and deep, the fixed point. The cannon fired. Harry went in. The maze was designed to disorient. The hedges moved, not randomly, but responsively, reorienting to separate the champion from clear paths, and the enchantments woven through them included a directional curse that scrambled magnetic sense and 2 varieties of concealment charm. Harry felt all of them attempt to engage and felt them fail, not because he'd prepared a specific counter but because the bond's directional sense, 4 points, deeply embedded, mature and stable, was not magnetic, not positional, not dependent on any faculty the maze's enchantments had accounted for. He knew exactly where he was relative to 3 people whose positions were constant, and from that he could extrapolate everything else. He moved through the first section in 4 minutes. The maze threw things at him. A baguette that took the shape of Voldemort. He dismissed it with a ridiculous that turned it into an old man in 2 large robes who immediately fell over, and then a patch of devil's snare across the floor that he burned away wandlessly with Fleur's fire, and then a section where the path split into 7 identical corridors and the correct one required reading the magical signature of the hedges, which Hermione's resonance reading handed him like a key. He didn't run. He moved with the purposeful, unhurried speed that the bond made possible, conserving nothing because there was nothing that needed conserving, the reservoir full and the 3 compass points steady around him, north and east and south, warm and awake in the stands where they were watching with the focused attention of people who were, through the bond, with him. At the center of the maze, 20 meters from the cup, he found Victor Krum. Krum was standing very still with his wand raised and his eyes empty. The specific emptiness of the imperious curse, and the specific quality of Krum's wand position, directed at Harry, at his chest, told Harry that whoever had cast it had known exactly where Harry would approach from. Harry stopped. Assessed. The bond fed him information, Hermione's resonance reading reaching through the hedges and showing him the magical signature of the Imperius on Krum, the layer of it, the quality. Old magic. Cast hours ago, not minutes. Krum's wand fired. Harry moved. Not dramatically. 2 steps left and a drop to one knee and the spell passed over him and hit the hedge behind him. He came back up and said, not loudly, "Victor, I know you're in there." He kept his wand down. "I'm not going to fight you. Whatever was put on you, I'm going to try to lift it. But I need you to fight it from inside. Push against it." The empty eyes didn't change. Krum fired again. Harry deflected it with a shield charm and moved closer, which was counterintuitive and was precisely why it worked. The Imperious caster's instructions would have anticipated retreat or offense, not approach. He got within arm's reach and reached not with his wand but with the bond, pushing a pulse of the shared warmth outward through his magic and into the space around Krum. Not an attack, not a counter-curse, something more fundamental. The quality of connection, the thing the Imperius tried to replace with obedience. A reminder to Krum's own magic of what it felt like to belong to itself. Krum blinked. Once. Twice. The emptiness cracked. "Fight it," Harry said quietly. Krum made a sound like someone surfacing from deep water, and his wand arm shook and then dropped. His eyes cleared, not all at once, gradual, like coming back into focus, And he looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has just understood several things simultaneously and finds them all profoundly uncomfortable. "Potter," he said rough. "Can you stand?" "Yes." He proved it. He was shaking slightly, but he was standing and his eyes were his own. He looked at his wand hand. Not now," Harry said. "Can you get out?" "I can get out." "Go. The exit is northeast, about 200 meters, the 7th left turn. Don't touch the right-hand wall in the last section, it has a confundus in it." He'd gotten this from Hermione's resonance map. "Go." Krum looked at him. Something moved in the Bulgarian's face that had nothing to do with the tournament, and everything to do with the fact that Harry had just chosen to help him rather than step past him to the cup. "Why?" "Because you're a person," Harry said, as if this were obvious, which to him it was. "Go." Krum went. Harry turned to the cup. It was 10 meters away, glowing faintly blue in the center of a clearing, the hedges opening around it in a rough circle. He walked toward it, and felt the maze go quiet around him, the way things go quiet before something significant. He stopped 3 meters from the cup. Through the bond, Hermione's resonance reading, which she'd been running at full extension for the entire duration of the task, hit something. He felt it land in the shared space like a stone, sharp, alarming, the quality of a magical signature she'd analyzed and found deeply wrong. "The cup," she sent through the bond. "The cup is wrong. Don't touch it." He stopped. He looked at the cup. Looked at the blue glow. Looked at the magical signature of it that Hermione was mapping, that the resonance reading was making visible to all of them. Not a trophy, not a portkey to a finish line, but a portkey to a specific location with a specific magical signature that Hermione was pulling through every reference she had. Graveyard, Daphne sent, through the bond. Flat and certain, and the still point behind it making the word very solid. "It's coded to a graveyard." Harry stood 3 meters from the cup and looked at it, and thought about Cedric, who was somewhere behind him in the maze and was going to come out of a hedge in approximately 10 minutes, and see the cup and pick it up because the cup was what you were supposed to pick up. He thought about Cedric Diggory, who danced well and who looked at Cho Chang like she was something worth looking at and who had, in 4 years of school, been consistently decent to Harry in ways that weren't required and weren't performed. He turned around and went back into the maze. He found Cedric in 6 minutes. Cedric was bleeding from a cut on his forearm. The maze had thrown something at him that had caught him, and moving with determination toward the clearing, and he stopped when he saw Harry coming toward him from the direction of the cup. "Harry," he said, surprised. "What are you?" "Don't touch the cup," Harry said. Cedric stared. "What?" "It's a portkey. It doesn't go to a finish line. It goes to a graveyard." Harry watched Cedric's face process this. "Someone built this task to get me to a specific location. I don't know everything about what's waiting there, but I know enough to know you don't want to be in it." Cedric's jaw tightened. "You're sure?" "Someone I trust is absolutely sure." "And you?" "I'm sure enough." Cedric looked at him for a long moment with the focused, serious quality of someone who has been tested enough to know what it feels like when a test is real versus performed. "What do we do?" "You get out of the maze," Harry said. "Through the eastern entrance, about 4 minutes that direction. You tell Dumbledore the cup is a portkey and you tell him where it goes." He paused. "I need him to know before I touch it." "Before you." Cedric stopped. "You're going to touch it anyway. Someone has to end this tonight." Harry met his eyes. "It's been building to tonight for over a year. If I walk away from the cup, it doesn't end, it just gets rescheduled for a time I won't see coming." He said it with the calm of someone who has thought about this completely, and made their decision from the whole of themselves rather than from the part that wants to be safe. "But I want Dumbledore to know where I've gone before I go." Cedric looked at him. Looked at the mark on his wrist, visible where Harry's sleeve had pushed up. Looked at him again. "You're not afraid." "I'm not stupid," Harry said. "It's different." Something moved in Cedric's face, Something that was not quite admiration and was not quite grief and was the specific quality of someone looking at a person carrying something immense and recognizing both the weight and the will. Go, Harry said. Cedric went. Fast. Harry walked back to the clearing and stood in front of the cup and sent through the bond, clearly and completely, everything, the port key, the graveyard signature, his intention, the shape of what was probably waiting. Not asking. Telling. Because they needed to know, and because the bond ran on honesty. Fleur's response was immediate and hot, the fire quality, not afraid but incandescent. Hermione's was the ordered intake of someone who'd expected this possibility and had been preparing a response framework. Daphne's was the still point, deep and present, and underneath it something that was not calm but was the very deliberate, muscular choice to be steady, and underneath that, briefly, fully present before she pulled it under, the thing that was not calculation at all. Come back, Daphne sent. Not a question. Not a plea. Just a fact stated in advance. The future tense used as instruction. I intend to, Harry sent back. He picked up the cup. The portkey activated and the world went. The graveyard was dark and cold and smelled like old stone and turned earth, and something that was not any natural smell. The specific quality of a place where dark magic had been worked regularly, where the ground had absorbed it over years. Harry landed, stumbled, came upright. The cup was in his hand. His wand was already drawn, not from fear, from the automatic preparedness that 3 months of intensive training had built into his body's reflexes, and the wand was warm with the bond's amplification running warm through it. He knew where he was. Hermione's resonance reading, even at whatever distance this portkey had covered, was running through the bond with the focused persistence of someone who had not let go of the thread, and through it he could feel the map of this place, old, wrong, saturated, and 2 signatures that he identified immediately. One was a human body. Alive. Waiting. One was something else. Something small and concentrated and vitally, horribly alive in the specific way that things are alive when they should not be. Wormtail, Harry said to the dark. A sound to his right. A figure emerging from between the headstones, small, rat-quick, carrying something wrapped in cloth that moved. Peter Pettigrew, who Harry had last seen disappearing into the Forbidden Forest as a rat 2 years ago, who had grey skin and terrified eyes and a silver hand that caught the moonlight. Harry Potter, Wormtail said, with the quality of someone delivering a line they'd been told to deliver. He said you'd come? He's been arranging it for a year, Harry said. He was always going to be disappointed if I didn't. Wormtail's grip on the bundle tightened. The bundle moved. What happened in the next 40 minutes was in the Ministry record later, the official reconstruction, pieced together from Harry's account and the magical forensic analysis of the graveyard and the specific, documented fact of Voldemort's return, and the record was accurate as far as it went, but it didn't capture the texture of it, the way Harry experienced it from inside the bond. The ritual happened. Harry was bound to the headstone of Tom Riddle Sr. and could not prevent the ritual and didn't try to, because preventing it was not the point. The point was what came after. What came after was Voldemort, flesh and bone and cold presence, a human form that carried the quality of something profoundly unnatural, the hollowness of a person who had systematically removed the things that made people human and was now walking around in the resulting space, and Death Eaters summoned from the dark and the cold, closing in a circle. Through it all, the bond ran. Clear and constant. The reservoir open and full. Hermione's resonance reading mapping the graveyard at full extension. Daphne's still point running through Harry like a spine of certainty. Fleur's fire available, present, waiting. Voldemort moved toward him with the cold, deliberate quality of someone who has been looking forward to this for a very long time. Harry Potter, he said, with the voice that was not quite human, the high, cold voice that had lived in Harry's nightmares since he was 11. At last. Tom, Harry said. The circle of Death Eaters made sounds. Voldemort's red eyes narrowed. Brave, Voldemort said. Or foolish. You've been trying to get me here for a year through a rigged tournament, Harry said. If I was going to be brave or foolish, this was the right place for it. Voldemort's wand was already raised. You have something that belongs to me, he said, and his eyes went to Harry's scar. A fragment. A piece of my soul that has been riding in your head since you were a year old. I want it back. I know, Harry said. You know. Voldemort studied him. Someone told you. We worked it out. Harry held his gaze. I know what it is. I know you've made others. I know where some of them are. He paused. You're not the only one who's been doing research. The cold quality of Voldemort's expression shifted, not to anything warm, nothing in this man's face went warm, but to the specific alertness of an intelligence encountering information it considers significant. The Bond? He said. Yes. The Triad. He said it with the tone of someone who has read about something in a book and is now looking at the live version with professional interest. I know what it is. I've known since January. He tilted his head. You thought the magic was shielding you. And you were right. But there is one thing the bond cannot protect you from. He raised his wand. Avada Kedavra. Harry moved. Not dodged. Moved, with the bond's full reservoir behind him, with Daphne still making every movement precise, with a wandless expansion of magical force that hit the killing curse midway between them like a wave hitting a wall. The green light fractured. Not absorbed, not reflected, fractured, broken into something that was neither its original intent nor harmless, dispersed through the graveyard air in fragments that hit the headstones and left marks. The Death Eater's circle went silent. Voldemort looked at his wand. Looked at Harry. That is not supposed to be possible, he said, with the tone of someone performing calculation rather than emotion. I know, Harry said. That's why you didn't plan for it. He pulled the fire. What came from his hands was not the palm-sized demonstration of the council hearing. He pulled from the full combined core, all four of them, Fleur's Veela fire running through the bond with the totality of her nature behind it, not suppressed, not held back, the old water in the channel that had been waiting 400 years, and what emerged from Harry's hands was not fire in any ordinary sense. It was the specific quality of a very old, very powerful magical tradition expressing itself through the anchor of a triad that had matured over months in a Scottish castle, while the world outside wasn't paying attention. The graveyard lit up. Not explosively. Not destructively. With the specific, surgical clarity of a light that could tell the difference between what should be consumed and what should be left standing. The Death Eaters at the edge of the circle were hit with a force that sent them backward into the dark, not killed, not Harry's intention, but removed from the equation completely. 3 of them hit the graveyard wall and stayed there. 2 more vanished into the dark beyond the headstones. The others, with the specific instinct of people who have dedicated their lives to following power, and have just witnessed power that made their master look like a first draft, ran. Voldemort stood his ground. Harry had expected nothing less. What he had not expected was what happened to Wormtail. Wormtail, who had been standing at the edge of the graveyard throughout, who had performed the ritual and bound Harry to the headstone and carried the bundle and done everything he'd been instructed, looked at the fire in Harry's hands and looked at Voldemort, who was still standing and still pointing his wand and whose face had the flat, cold quality of someone who intends to finish what they started, and Pettigrew, who had spent his entire adult life choosing the side that looked safest. Looked at Voldemort and looked at Harry and chose. He ran between them. Not toward Harry, toward the silver hand he'd been given, which he was using to reach into his own robe, and what he produced was a vial that Harry recognized in the same moment Voldemort did. No, Voldemort said, and said it with something that was not quite emotion but was the edge of it, the edge of a man who had eliminated emotion and discovered that certain failures still registered. Wormtail smashed the vial against the base of a headstone. It was a bond-breaking vial. Harry knew the signature because Hermione had documented it in her research, the specific magical compound used historically to forcibly dissolve anchored dark magic, and it wasn't the most elegant tool and it wasn't going to do everything Harry needed it to do, but what it did do, in the moment it shattered, was damage the anchor. The fragment in Harry's scar burned. White and sharp and clean, and Harry held it, held the burn, held the still point, held the bond's warmth behind the pain, and in that moment of damage the fragment loosened. Not removed. Loosened. The difference between something embedded and something that could, with the right application of the right magic at the right moment, be extracted without destroying the container. Voldemort hit Wormtail with a curse that put him on the ground. He turned back to Harry with the red eyes showing something that was anger's cousin, something colder and more dangerous. Interesting, he said. Your rat is more useful dead than he was alive. He's not dead, Harry said. He could tell. Pettigrew's breath was visible in the cold air. He's down. A distinction that won't matter to him shortly. Voldemort raised his wand again. Shall we conclude this? You're going to lose, Harry said. Not a taunt. A statement. I want you to know that before it happens, because I think you've been operating on information that was approximately 2 years out of date. You've been planning for a boy who hides in cupboards and hopes things work out. That's not what's standing in front of you. Voldemort's wand moved. Harry drew everything the bond had, every drop of the combined reservoir, all 4 of them together, the anchor and the fire and the precision and the deep groundedness, and he let it come through him the way he'd let the water in the lake come through him, the way he'd held the fire in the council hearing. The way the room of requirement had responded to him on that February evening with 3 people around him and the evening light coming through the windows. He cast a single spell. Wandless. Not a killing spell, not Harry's way, not in the catalogue of things he intended to ever do, but the oldest light spell in recorded magical history, the one Hermione had found in the 14th century document Apollon had brought, the one the Triad of 1312 had used, the one the document described as Lux Primordial, the first light. The light that magic itself had been before it was divided into categories and words and wand movements. It came from his hands as gold-white fire, and it hit Voldemort's wand arm with a precision that shattered the wand and simultaneously, through the specific quality of this particular light touching the specific quality of Voldemort's particular magic, unraveled the dark enchantments wrapping the man's body, the ones that had been keeping him tethered to the flesh through anchored soul fragments and dark ritual. The body fell. Not dead, that would require the fragments to be properly addressed, which was the longer project, which was tomorrow's work, but stripped of its anchoring. A body without tether. A man reduced to what he'd always been underneath the centuries of dark magic and self-modification, a frightened orphan who had decided that love was weakness and had spent a lifetime constructing elaborate proofs of the conviction, and was now lying in a graveyard without his wand and without his followers and without the fragments that had been holding him together, and would not be recovering easily or quickly from any of it. The red eyes looked up at Harry from the cold ground. Not possible, Voldemort said. His voice had lost its resonance. What was left was something thin and very human and old. It's the bond, Harry said. You were right about that. You just didn't understand what it meant. He picked up the portkey cup from where it had fallen and was gone. He landed on the Hogwarts grounds, outside the maze's entrance, and Hermione hit him at a dead run 2 seconds later, not gracefully. She ran like someone who had been standing very still for a long time and was now using every muscle simultaneously, and then Daphne was there, composed and whole except for the quality of her eyes, which were the eyes of someone who has been holding something extremely tightly and is now, carefully, letting go. And Fleur, whose fire was under her skin, visible, golden white beneath her surface, not because she'd lost control but because she was not suppressing it, not tonight, not after this. Fleur put both hands on Harry's face and looked at him with the complete, unguarded look that he'd first seen in a cold classroom in December, except now it had months behind it. Months of training and fire and lake water and council hearings and letters from grandmothers, and it was not unguarded because there was nothing left to guard against. You came back, she said. I said I would. The stands were emptying. Dumbledore was crossing the grounds with the particular speed of someone who has been waiting for exactly this, and is moving before the crowd has processed what it's watching. McGonagall was beside him. Beaumont, who had, It emerged later, been in the stands with the official observers when the bound's signal had been visible enough that she'd taken out her parchment and begun writing, was already moving toward them. In the sky above the Quidditch pitch, the stars were out. The bond ran between all four of them, warm and steady and deep, and it was not the tentative, astonished forebeat of a December night with ice sculptures and an accidental kiss and a cold classroom where 3 young women and 1 bewildered boy had stood in the moonlight and looked at matching marks on their wrists, and not known what they were. It was something that had been tested and had held. Something that had been pressured and had grown. Something that had been sent 40 meters underwater, and into a graveyard and through a council hearing and had come out the other side knowing its own shape completely. Dumbledore reached them. He looked at Harry, at the state of him, the evidence of the graveyard, the golden white fire still faint on his hands, and then at all four of them, standing together in the way they always stood, and Harry watched something leave the old headmaster's face. Not his authority, not his intelligence. Something else. The plan, maybe? The careful architecture of a future he'd been building for 14 years with Harry as its centerpiece, its designated sacrifice. Harry watched it leave Dumbledore's face and watched something else replace it, something that looked, to Harry's eye, like relief. "He's back," Harry said, because Dumbledore needed to know that first. "Voldemort. He had a body and a ritual and 12 Death Eaters. He doesn't currently have a working wand or the anchoring he arrived with. He's alive but significantly diminished." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'll give you the full account. But there are things you need to tell me in return. About the fragments. About what they are and where they are. All of them." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. All of them. You have my word." "Good." Harry looked at Beaumont, who had her parchment and was writing with the controlled urgency of someone who knows a document will matter. For the record, the Triad bond performed fully and without incident throughout this entire evening, including in circumstances of extreme magical stress. I want that in whatever Beaumont files with whoever she files it with. "It is noted," Beaumont said without looking up. Beside him, Hermione made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob and was, given the evening they'd had, probably both. Daphne exhaled with the specific quality of the still point releasing, the deepest kind of breathing out, the kind that follows a very long time of holding steady. Fleur's fire settled under her skin, golden and present, no longer needing to announce itself. Neville Longbottom appeared at the edge of the crowd. He'd made his way down from the stands and was standing at the boundary of the circle of space that had formed naturally around the four of them, and his face was the face of someone who had watched something enormous and found it, despite everything, something he recognized. He caught Harry's eye and gave a single nod. Harry nodded back. The night continued. The ministry would arrive in an hour. The summer would follow, and the longer work would begin, the fragments, the council, Dumbledore's reckoning with 14 years of plans that no longer served, the slow, grinding effort of a wizarding world that did not want to know what it needed to know until it could not avoid knowing it. All of that was coming. But the graveyard was empty. The maze was over. The cup was sitting in the grass where Harry had dropped it. And the pulse in Harry's chest was 4 beat and warm and steady, and the 3 compass points were all present, north and east and south, all clear, all close, and the stars above Hogwarts were winter bright in a June sky, and Harry thought about an old woman in France who had said fire that is understood and expressed serves you. And he thought about a document 700 years old that had been waiting for its ending to arrive and had waited long enough, and he thought about a cold classroom in December with moonlight on the floor and matching marks on 4 wrists, and none of them knowing yet what they were. He knew now. He thought it was something worth knowing.